Okay. אני אעבור לאנגלית. ברוכים הבאים. Welcome everyone to the Tel Aviv chapter of the 20th anniversary of the OSI's celebration. For people who want, people who want wireless, you've got about 20 seconds while I leave the slide on to set up your Wi-Fi. Before we get started, in a few moments I'm going to invite Lior Kaplan up to speak about open source in Israel. Before we do, I want to pay respect and say thank you to some people, some organizations that without which this evening would not have happened. First and foremost, the clicker that doesn't work. First and foremost, to ironSource for hosting us, providing the surprise that we're going to have for the duration of this evening, and for helping to bring guest speaker Steve Walli, who's going to be giving a talk later tonight. Special thanks to Issac, who was the contact here and who put up with a lot of crap from me and really came through and helped make this an amazing, hopefully it'll be an amazing event. So thank you to ironSource. Big special thank you to Microsoft, who also took part in bringing the special guest speaker to here. And to Adir Ron from, I don't know, Adir, are you here? No, he's not here yet. But Adir Ron, who's one of the open source people at Microsoft Israel, and when he heard that we were doing this, he really bent over backwards and pulled a lot of strings for us. And the last special thanks is to Netscape Communicator, and there's a surprise. There's a surprise. You'll get a position of honor later. We're gonna, if you can. Anyone can tell me why Netscape should be on the special things list? This is classic open source trivia, and that's a hint. Open source trivia. Okay, but why does that? A lot of people open source their products. Huh? It's on his slides? That's fine. So Lior, why don't you come up and give the answer, and then we're going to get started with your talk. How about that? Ladies and gentlemen, Lior Kaplan. Give him a round of applause. Come on. Nice.
כולם שומעים? טוב, אז מסתבר שלא תיאמנו, אבל יש לנו שותפים דומים, לפחות הקטע הנטסקייפ. 20 שנה ל-OSI, עוד שנייה נגע במה זה. קוראים לי ליאור קפלן, אני מתעסק בייעוץ של קוד פתוח, חבר בקהילת הקוד הפתוח הישראלי בין 15 ל-17 שנה, תלוי מאיפה סופרים. וכמו שיצחק אמר מקודם, בשביל לענות על השאלה בכלל מה זה קוד פתוח, אנחנו צריכים רגע לגעת בנטסקייפ. אם מישהו זוכר את סוף שנות ה-90, אחד הדברים שקרו בעולם האינטרנט זה מלחמת הדפדפנים, נטסקייפ מול אקספלורר, ובאיזשהו שלב, קצת אחרי השיא של נטסקייפ, באזור של 96-7, הם החליטו ממש בתחילת 98 לעשות מעשה אמיץ, מה שהרבה אנשים חשבו שמבחינה תאגידית אולי יהיה איזושהי התאבדות. כלומר, הם החליטו לשחרר את כל הקוד מקור שלהם לאינטרנט. באותו שלב הם אמרו שהם הולכים לתת אותו פרי. מה המשמעות? הם לא פירטו, הם הודיעו על זה כמעט 3 חודשים מראש, יצאו בהצהרה שזה הולך לקרות בסוף הרבעון הראשון של 98, ולא פירטו יותר מדי חוץ מאת הכוונה הכללית, אבל לא פירטו איך הם יעשו את זה, והיו להם פחות או יותר 3 חודשים בשביל להתכונן. ברגע שהם הכריזו, הם התחילו לבדוק מה הלאה, איך אנחנו הולכים לעשות את זה בפועל. אחד הדברים שעשו זה לאסוף את האנשים של עולם התוכנה החופשית ולדבר איתם. באחד מהפגישות תכנון הראשונות עלה הרעיון של לייצר את המושג open source, עוד שנייה ניגע בו. רק להזכיר מה נטסקייפ עשו, אז הם יצאו בהודעה לעיתונות, וזה השתי שורות של ההודעה הראשונה. Netscape announces plan to make next generation communicator, זה השם של הדפדפן בזמנו. Source code available free on the net. הפירוש, כמו שאמרתי, עוד לא ברור. Bold move to harness creative power of thousands of internet developers. היום זה נראה לנו לא כזה מוזר. בשלב ההוא זה היה לחלוטין לא ברור. אגב, כתוצאה מהצעד הזה, נוצר הלוגו של ארגון מוזילה, מה שקיים עד היום מתפתח במאוחר יותר לפיירפוקס, ויצאו מזה עוד הרבה דברים טובים. עכשיו, הרעיון של בכלל להגיע מתוכנה חופשית לקוד פתוח, להמון אנשים זה נראה קצת כמו סמנטיקה, אבל בזמנו היה לזה משמעות יותר גדולה. קודם כל, כי נושא התוכנה החופשית היה קיים בשנות ה-70 וה-80, החל מהתקופה שבכלל התוכנה היה מוצר נלווה לחומרה והגיע בלי שום רישיון או בלי שום עניין, ואיך עניינים של רישוי בתוך ארצות הברית של AT&T ובלאבס, שלא יכלו להפיץ מוצר מסחרי ולכן מכרו רישיונות לעולם היוניקס, וקיבלו את כל מקור, אם זה בצורה מאוד מאוד בסיסית, דרך רישיונות אקדמיים, דוגמת BSD. העולם הזה היה מאוד פשוט, ולאט לאט נסגר, ובאזור הזה סוג של להתפוצץ. אנחנו עוד שנייה נחזור לזה טיפה יותר. מיד אחרי שעשו את הצעד הזה, הלכו טיפה קדימה, והתחילו לחשוב, אוקיי, אז מה... יש לנו רעיון של אופן סורס, שכאמור נסביר עוד שקפים. איך אנחנו הולכים לעשות את זה? אחד הדברים שהחליטו לעשות, זה גם לרשום ארגון שיקרא Open Source Initiative, ואחד הדברים הראשונים שהוא הולך לעשות, זה גם להתעסק בכלל מה זה הולך להיות קוד פתוח. שמכיוון שהאנשים שהיו מעורבים בזה היו אנשי קהילה, קודם גם אמרו, רגע, יש לנו מסמך שקיים מפרויקט דביאן, שקיים כמה שנים לפני כן בתור הפצת לינוקס. אנחנו ניקח את ה-Debian Free Software Guidelines, ונקרא לזה Open Source Definition. המסמך הזה בעצם יאפשר לנו, בדיוק כמו שהוא עושה עבור דביאן ספציפית, להכיל אותו בצורה יותר כללית על עולם הקוד הפתוח, ולנסות להבחין מהו כן קוד פתוח, מהו לא קוד פתוח. אני לא אעבור איתכם על כל הרשימה, אבל זו רשימה שמתעסקת בעולם הזה בצורה הרבה יותר תכליסית, ולא רק ברמה הפילוסופית של המושג תוכנה חופשית. חלק מהקונספטים כמובן משותפים, היכולת להריץ לכל מטרה, אי אפליה, דברים כאלה, אבל הרשימה פה היא קצת יותר עניינית. הרעיון של למחזר דברים מחדש, אגב, יגיע גם, אנחנו גם מסתכלים על זה ברמת הקוד, אנחנו רוצים כל הזמן לייצר אבני בניין, ולהשתמש בהם מחדש ולא להמציא את הגלגל מחדש. וזה דבר שקורה מהשלב הזה של נטסקייפ, ונמשיך הלאה. אנחנו מסתכלים על נטסקייפ, אחד הדברים הגדולים שהם עשו בזמנו, זה לייצר איזה משהו קטן שנועד לווב, וכנראה בהתחלה לא ישפיע יותר מדי, נקרא JavaScript. שבו איזה מפלצת זה היום, 20 שנה אחר כך. בסדר? שוכתב כמה פעמים, נוצרו מינויים חדשים, עוד חברות נכנסו לתחום. היכולת של הכוח של קוד פתוח, ועליו גם, או ביחד איתו סטנדרטים פתוחים, יצרו מינויי חדשנות מאוד מאוד גדולים. וזה אחד המקומות שרואים בהם את החופש הזה ואת היכולת לרוץ קדימה בעולם הזה שכל אחד יכול לבנות על אחרים. אני חוזר רגע למה זה קוד פתוח, וזה בכוונה נכתב עם טיפה ציניות. קודם כל זה מהלך שיווקי. כלומר, כי הקונספטים מאחורי זה היו קיימים בין 15 ל-20 שנה קודם, אבל יש פה מהלך שהוא ריברנדינג, ואנשים שיזמו את המושג קוד פתוח ואת ה-OSI מודים בזה בפה מלא. כשאתה מסתכל על המסמכים המקוריים שלהם, הם אומרים, קודם כל רצינו ליצור שם או משהו שיותר קל לשווק לאנשים אחרים, וזה כמובן מעל המושג תוכנה חופשית. צריך לזכור שהמושג הזה גם היה קיים, אבל להמון אנשים היה מאוד קשה לעיכול. ובכוונה יש פה עניין של התייחסות לאנשי עסקים, כי קודם כל המהלך של נטסקייפ היה מהלך עסקי לחלוטין. זה לא רק רצונם הטוב או משהו כזה. אפשר לשפוט את זה בראי היסטוריה מה קרה לחברה עצמה, שעברה כמה תהפוכות, אבל המוצר שלהם הצליח מעבר למצופה בכל מיני זירות, כולל כל המוצרי המשך, וחלקנו הגדול עדיין משתמש בדברים שהם המציאו בפנים. אגב, אחד מהדברים שהם המציאו זה גם הגרסאות המוקדמות של הצפנה, שכולנו משתמשים. SSL החליף TLS מאז, אבל לפני 20 שנה הם התחילו לחשוב על בוא נאבטח את האתר האינטרנט. המושג הם רצו לצאת מהלופ הזה שמתעסק בפילוסופיה ופוליטיקה, כי הם הבינו כשאתה מדבר עם אנשי עסקים, קודם כל מעניין אותם אתה וזה. ורצו לייצר מוצר שיותר צריכה לשווק. ומבחינת המודל העסקי, זה לא רק מודל עסקי ברמה של חברה נטו, אלא אם צריך לתמצת מה זה קוד פתוח, ושמים רגע את הצד הטכנולוגי של הרישיון, מדובר קודם כל במודל של פיתוח תוכנה באמצעות קהילה. וזה אחד הדברים שהכי חזקים, ואני אומר את זה רגע מניסיון אישי, גם החוויות שלי מישראל ובטח בעולם, של הצד הקהילתי, הוא הדבר הכי משמעותי בסיפור הזה. גם כי אתה חוצה גבולות בצורה מאוד קלה יחסית, זה נכון גם אם זה גבולות במובן היותר חברתי, גם אם זה גבולות במובן העסקי. אתה מגיע למקומות שיהיה לך הרבה יותר קשה להגיע להם, אם זה רק במובן העסקי נטו. דבר שני, היכולת שלך לרוץ קדימה, לגייס משאבים חיצוניים, היא מאוד מאוד גדולה. כשגוף מסחרי רוצה להרים כנס, הוא מתחיל למצוא כסף, הוא מתחיל למצוא אנשים שאולי איכשהו רוצים להרוויח. אתה מדבר בעולם הקוד הפתוח, וקודם כל מייצר איזשהו חזון, מוצא אנשים שמעוניינים לעשות אותו איתכם, או איתך במקרה הזה, ויכולים לרוץ קדימה. על זה אפשר לבנות מודלים עסקיים במובן החומרי בשלב יותר מאוחר. אבל היכולת הזאת לגייס אנשים איתך היא מאוד מאוד משמעותית, ובוודאי כשזה מרחבי העולם, ולפעמים אנשים שגם לא היית מצפה להם. הרבה פעמים חברות מסחריות אומרות, אוקיי, זה הקהל מטרה שלי, אני אפנה אליהם, זה שותף טבעי שלי, אני אפנה אליו. עכשיו, בעולם קוד פתוח, הרבה פעמים אתה אומר, אני הולך לעשות משהו, ואתה לא יודע מאיפה תבוא ההפתעה, והכוונה להפתעה טובה. אתה מגלה איזה בן אדם ברזיל, שפתאום מעניין אותו מה שאתה עושה. בן אדם ממזרח אירופה, שרוצה לעזור לך, וזה לא משנה מה הסיבה שלו, זה יכול להיות תועלת אישית שלו, אבל הוא עדיין מוכן לעזור לך ולתרום קוד. אני רואה את זה אפילו עם הכנות שעשיתי למצגת הזאת. אמרתי לאנשים שאני הולך לעשות מצגת. פרסמתי איזשהו תבנית מאוד מאוד בסיסית וביקשתי מאנשים עזרה. ויש 8-10 אנשים שתרמו הערות, תרמו נקודות, תרמו רעיונות למצגת, וזה מאוד מאוד משמעותי, עובדים בקהילה. עכשיו, את רובם אני מכיר, אבל לא את כולם. חלקם הגעתי דרך פייסבוק, לינקים וכו'. וזה הרבה פעמים כוחה של קהילה. אם הייתי אומר שאני הולך לעשות מצגת מסחרית מטעם חברה שאני עובד בה, כנראה שהם לא היו תורכים, אולי נכנסים לראות אם עשיתי שם איזה רעיון יפה ואפשר לגנוב אותו. אני מספק שהם היו משקיעים בזמנם בלחפש מידע, להציע מידע, להעלות רעיונות וכו'. וזה פחות או יותר מה שקורה בעולם הקוד הפתוח. נדלג רגע לקוד פתוח בישראל. כשניסיתי לחשוב איך מסכמים 20 שנה של הדבר הזה, ואיך בכלל מגיעים לכל ההיסטוריה, שחלקה קורית לפני שאני בכלל הייתי בתחום, חלקה קורית גם כשעוד הייתי בתיכון, אז יש דברים, והאינטרנט עוד יחסית בחיתוליו בטח בארץ. כלומר, אם אנחנו מדברים על 98, זה בערך שנתיים נגיד, אחרי שנכנס אינטרנט בישראל, אולי שנה אחרי שהוא נכנס באופן מסחרי, ואנשים יכלו לקבל את זה בבית. זה לא כזה נפוץ. גם להגיע לחלק מהארכיונים היה מאתגר. ולכן אני רוצה לנוע על 3 קהלי יד, שזה פחות או יותר 2 שהזכרתי עד עכשיו, שזה קהילה ועסקים. וכשמדברים ברמה מדינתית, אני רוצה להתייחס גם לממשלה. כי מבחינתי זה איזשהו משולש, סליחה, שמשלים אחד את השני. זה בדרך כלל מתחיל בקהילה, עובר לעסקים, מגיע לממשלה, ומשם יוצר איזשהו לופ. אז קודם כל נתחיל מ-2010. מייקל אייזנברג מפרסם משהו שנקרא מניפסט החומוס, ובתור איש של קרנות הון סיכון, יש לו הרבה ביקורת על הפעילות הממשלתית. עכשיו, הביקורת הזו ברובה היא לא חדשה. היא הושמעה גם 10 שנים לפני כן, ו5 שנים לפני כן, כולל כמה אירועים קהילתיים שאנשי הקוד הפתוח יצאו להפגנה עם שלטים מול משרדי ממשלה, בגלל חוזים של הממשלה, שקיימה עם חברות מסחריות ולא שקלה אלטרנטיבות של קוד פתוח. הצליח יותר, הצליח פחות, יחסי ציבור, אפשר להסתכל על זה בהרבה דברים. חלק מהדברים האלה השפיעו. לדוגמה, ב-2004, ממשלת ישראל לקראת חידוש של חוזים מסחריים, החליטה לעשות ניסוי ולממן גיור של אופן אופיס. כלומר, הממשלה שמה כסף כדי להוסיף קוד לפרויקט קוד פתוח. דאז עדיין בשליטה של סם, העבודה בוצעה על ידי חברה מסחרית, זה עדיין לא עבודה קהילתית. זה צעד מאוד מאוד משמעותי של ממשלת ישראל, אז נעשה על ידי החשב הכללי. אגב, פעילות שמצד אחד ברמה של תיקונים וכו', הם עדיין קיימים בכל, הם מאוד עזרו לשפר את מצב העברית. יש פה גם את אחד האנשים שטיפה תרם לזה. אבל אם מסתכלים על זה מבחינת התוצאה, לאזרח ישראלי אין גרסה של אופן אופיס. זכרונו לברכה, זמין על כל עמדה, זה מאבק מסוג שונה. אבל יש לזה גם, אגב, גם מסגרים טכנולוגיים ברמת החברה. אני אומר את זה גם בתור מישהו שניסה לתרום כל הפרויקט. החברה, במקרה הזה סן, לא התנהגו באמת כמו פרויקט קוד פתוח שאנחנו רוצים לראות היום, וחסמו חלק מהדברים. אגב, בגלל זה, גם הקהילה עשתה להם פורק, והיום אם אתם מחפשים אופן אופיס, הדבר הזה לא קיים. גם הניסיון להפוך אותו לאפאצ'י אופן אופיס, די על הקרשים, והפורק של הקהילה שנקרא ליבר אופיס, חי ופורח, והיום כדי להכניס תיקונים שקשורים לעברית, זה בערך זמן של לייצר את הפאץ', ועוד יום-יומיים לשלוח אימיילים לאנשים, ומפה זה באמת תלוי באיכות הפאץ', אבל התהליך נהיה הרבה יותר סביר. אני חוזר למניפסט החומוס. יש הרבה ביקורת על הדברים האלה, ואיך שהממשלה מתנהגת. לדוגמה, עד ההכרזה שהיא תהיה בשקף הבא, היה כמעט 7 שנים. אוקיי? רשות התקשוב מציעה הנגשת תוכנה ממשלתית בכל פתוח, כמו במדינות אחרות בעולם. הבעיה, שזה עדיין ברמת ההצהרה וכותרת מאוד יפה בעיתון, אבל כותרת, ואנחנו מחכים לראות את התוצאות של זה. מצד שני, יש כמה דברים שהממשלה התחילה לשחרר קוד. הגיעה למצב שהיא פתחה חשבון בגיטה. ובכוונה, אני מזכיר, אני הולך דווקא מהכיוון של הממשלה ולא מתחיל מההיסטוריה של הקהילה, כי הממשלה היא גוף שבהרבה מקומות הוא מאוד שמרן. כשזה מגיע אליהם, סימן שאנחנו לא רק מיינסטרים, אלא 2 צעדים אחרי המיינסטרים. בסדר? מאמצים טכנולוגיות יחסית לאט.
זה הממשלה בצד גיטה.
רשות התקשוב. אוקיי? אין בו משהו שיפיל את כולנו מהכיסאות, זה לא ברמה של שחררו קוד שהוא פרי פיתוח מלא שלהם. הגיעו לפרויקט שהם היו חייבים לשנות את הרישיון, ועשו את זה, זה צעד ראשון. זה לפעמים צעד שמראה להם שהדבר שהם פוחדים ממנו הוא לא כל כך נורא, או שמדיניות צריכה גם להתבצע בצעדים מעשיים. זה אגב מהבוקר, בסדר? אני פתחתי את הבוקר עם הדבר הזה. סיבוב פרסה ברשות לחדשנות, תתחיל לתמוך במפתחי קוד פתוח. חדשה מאוד משמעותית, גם פה ביקשתי מהם את המדיניות, נראה מתי נקבל את זה, נראה. עוד לא ראיתי את ההצהרה הזאת אצלהם באתר, אבל רשות החדשנות אחרי תהליך בחינה של שנה, שהם קיבלו לא מעט ניירות עמדה שתומכים בקוד פתוח, יש בחדר לפחות 2 גורמים ששלחו להם ניירות עמדה, מכיר עוד כמה גופים מסחריים ששלחו להם ניירות שתומכים בזה. וזה, אם זה יתחיל לקרות, יהיה מאוד מאוד משמעותי כדי לייצר עוד חברות שמתעסקות בקוד פתוח בארץ, מה שהיום פורמלית לפי הרשות לחדשנות נאסר. כביכול מוותרים על קניין רוחני, במקרה שלנו זה בעיקר אי הבנה של איך התחום הזה עובד. ושכסף עושים גם בקניין רוחני, אבל יש כל מיני דרכים לעשות את זה. עכשיו, אחד הגופים שמאוד מאמצים קוד פתוח בארץ, הוא גוף שגם הוא צרכן גדול של טכנולוגיה, אבל יש לו אספקט לא פחות חשוב. הוא ברוב המקומות מכשיר את הדורות הבאים של התוכניתנים. כשאני מסתכל, ואגב, לא למערכת החינוך אני מתכוון, אבל כשאני מסתכל עליו, אני אומר, הסטנדרטים שהוא מאמץ זה בדרך כלל הסטנדרטים שהשוק יקבל 3 שנים אחר כך, ובמקרה הזה זה דוגמה בעיקר מחיל אוויר, שעשו פרויקט מאוד גדול, התחיל לפני בערך 10 שנים, שמעבר מיוניקס ללינוקס, ואחרי זה, וכמובן פה במקרה הזה, במרכאות, גוזרים על זה קופות מבחינת יחסי ציבור, הם שמחים להתפאר בהישגים. אני נראה שכן, גם אתה מצטער. עכשיו, כשהצבא הולך לעולם הקוד הפתוח, זה אין פה תאריך, אבל זה לדעתי מלפני 2014, תודה. לפני כמעט 14. עכשיו, כשהצבא הולך לדברים האלה, הוא גם דואג, סליחו לי על הביטוי, הוא גם מכסתף את עצמו, וזו דוגמה מהפרקליטות הצבאית, שעשתה בדיקה של הרישיון הזה. בסדר? חוזרים לאיזשהו לופ שהוא בין הצד הטכנולוגי, שהוא מאוד חדשני, לבין הצד המשפטי. ובעולם הקוד הפתוח אנחנו כל הזמן נעים, או בהרבה מקומות נעים בין המתח הזה. כי אנחנו רוצים חדשנות, החדשנות מושפעת הרבה פעמים מהרישיון שנבחר, כי כל רישיון נותן תמריצים שונים. הוא משפיע על הקהילה שתיווצר לנו, או על האפשרויות שלנו, או על היכולת של אנשים לעשות מזה דברים מסחריים שונים שהם בבסיס שלהם פתוחים, אבל פחות פתוחים, כל מקום והשיטה שלו, אבל מה שחשוב זה שיש מגוון. עכשיו, בכוונה לקחתי את הדוגמאות גם של הממשלה וגם של צה"ל, כי הם איזשהו סמן קיצוני לדברים האלה. במקרים האלה, הבדיקות ופה חיל אוויר, וגם יש דברים דומים של אמ"ן ושל חיל המודיעין, שהחלטתי לא להעמיס עליכם בצילומי מסך מהעיתונות, אבל כשהצבא מחליט שהוא הולך במקרה של השנים האחרונות לאופנסטאק, הוא מכשיר אנשים להתעסק בטכנולוגיות האלה, שיש חברות מסחריות גדולות שמתעסקות בהן, אנחנו חוזרים למעגלים האלה שנסגרים, שהצבא רוצה שהתעשייה תתעסק בקוד פתוח, התעשייה אחרי זה מקבלת את האנשים שמתעסקים בקוד פתוח בצבא, וזה אפשר להגיד בהקצנה סיפור של הייטק בישראל, אבל זה מאפשר לחברות שאין להם שום קשר לתעשייה הצבאית או לתחומים האלה, בכלל להגיע לעולם הזה, ולא רק על ידי אנשי שיווק או אנשי מחירות שבאים לממשלה ולגופים גדולים ומתדפקים על הדלתות שלהם בקטע של טוב, בואו נשווק להם מוצרים מסחריים, נושא של נהילת ספקים ועוד כל מיני דברים טובים שמגיעים עם עולם הקוד הפתוח. אם אנחנו נתעסק רגע עם הקהילה בארץ, ורשמתי כמה נקודות, וזה לחלוטין לא רשימה סופית, ואין לי שום יכולת גם לחסות את כל הפעילות קוד פתוח בארץ, אבל אני אנסה לתת כמה דוגמאות, חלקם אגב בכוונה דוגמאות של תחילת הקהילה. כשאנחנו מדברים בכלל על רשימות תפוצה, אני מזכיר לכם לפני 95, שזה השלב של האינטרנט המסחרי. ניצני האינטרנט המסחרי בארץ, יש בכלל יוזנט, זה עוד לפני האימייל והרשימות תפוצה שאנחנו מכירים היום. עולה איזושהי שאלה, מי משתמש בלינוקס? לינוקס אגב, אז משהו בערך בין שנה וחצי עד שנתיים. לחלוטין לא ברור מאליו שמשהו שהתחיל במחלקת מחשבים בפינלנד וקצת התקדם בעוד מחלקות למדעי המחשב מגיע לישראל ונמצא בשימוש. מבדיקה שעשיתי בכל מיני threadים של אימיילים יותר ישנים, אפשר לראות את זה יחסית בשלב מאוד מוקדם, במחלקות למדעי המחשב בישראל. עכשיו, שוב, בשלב הזה לינוקס התחיל כאיזשהו ניסוי תיאורטי. סטודנט שנמאס לו ממערכת קניינית ששימשה ללימודים שלו, ללימודים התיאורטיים של מדעי המחשב, כתב משהו משל עצמו. הדבר הזה התפשט בצורה משמעותית. ברגע שיש רשימת תפוצה בארץ, אגב, קיימת גם היום, לכמעט רוב השנים יש גם ארכיון שאפשר לגשת אליו. כמה מגבלות טכנולוגיות שאתה מנסה לשמור על ארכיונים של רשימות תפוצה במשך 94 עד היום, 24 שנה, זה מאוד מכובד, זה מפתיע שבכלל רוב החומר הזה קיים. נוצר איזשהו פורום שנקרא איגלו, למי שלא מכיר, Israeli Group of Linux Users, כמובן השם והראשי תיבות ברורים בגלל שאנחנו מתעסקים בפיגמינים. אנשים מאוד אוהבים את הנושא של ראשי תיבות מתחכמים בעולם הזה, וכל עוד זה יוצא מוצלח. על החפירות שלי או החקירות של מה נעשה בתקופה ההיא בקוד הפתוח, גיליתי ראיון במסגרת תוכנית המחשבים של הטלוויזיה החינוכית. לצערי לא הצלחתי להשיג את הוידאו, אבל תחשבו שזומבית בתקופה ההיא הייתה, אני חושב, התוכנית מחשבים המובילה.
היה בתחרות.
גם לא הייתה הרבה תחרות, גם בעיתונות לא היו מדורי טכנולוגיה מאוד מאוד מפותחים. ב-99 אני חושב שכבר היה קפטן אינטרנט ואולי ידיעות אחרונות עם דרור גלוברמן. בסופו של דבר להגיע לדבר על לינוקס ב-99 שזה לפני שזה נהיה משהו מאוד מיינסטרים. אנחנו לא מדברים על ענן, על זה שצריך להתקין בדואל בוט, כל מיני דברים כאלה. זה הפתיע אותי, ממש הפתיע אותי. הייתי מאוד שמח לראות את הוידאו, כנראה יקרה בקרוב. במקביל, אחד הדברים שקורים זה שהמחלקות למדעי המחשב מתחילות לייצר מועדוני לינוקס. זה מועדונים שמתעסקים בטכנולוגיה הזאת בצורה יותר עמוקה, חלקם ברמה הממש אקדמית, חלקם ברמה היותר יומיומית. מדובר פה על מפגש, חלק שבועי, חלק דו-שבועי, תלוי על איזה מועדון אנחנו מדברים, כמובן השנים משתנות. רוב המועדונים האלה החזיקו מעמד, בוא נגיד בין 10 ל-15 שנים, תלוי באוניברסיטה. זה כמובן עניין של חילופי דורות, אנשים שסיימו את התארים שלהם, חלקם סיימו גם את הדוקטורט שלהם ופשוט עברו למקומות אחרים. חלקם זה התוכן, שהנושא נהיה מספיק פופולרי, שלא צריך להגיע למחלקה למדעי המחשב בשביל לדבר על לינוקס וקוד פתוח. ובמקרה הזה אני מאוד שמח שזה נהיה המצב, שהדברים יהיו מספיק פופולריים כדי שיתרו את הצורך הראשוני הזה. אחד הדברים שגם קרו ברמה הקהילתית זה כנסי אוקוס פינגווין. יש טיפה הסבר על עמותת המקור בהרצאה אחריי, אבל חבר'ה מהקהילה שרצו לראות איזשהו סרט, אמרו אוקיי, בואו נתאגד, נייצר משהו שהוא חברתי. הבינו שיש קשיים לייצר פעילות שאין אף אחד שלוקח בעלות, כי לא כולם רוצים לממן כמה אלפי שקלים על זכויות שיוצרים לסרט, או לרכוש או לשכור אולם וכו'. מצד אחד הצליחו קודם כל לייצר אירוע מוצלח. דבר שני אמרו, רגע, אם האירוע היה מוצלח ואנחנו רואים שיש עניין, אז בואו נקים עמותה. לדוגמה, אחד מהדברים שהעמותה עושה, בתור מצלח שאני בלב לך איזה שורה מהמצגת, זה לדוגמה, כשהממשלה באה ואומרת אני רוצה נייר עמדה, אז היא יודעת לייצר נייר עמדה, כמובן בעזרת המתנדבים, אבל יש מישהו שיכול לייצג את נושאי הקוד הפתוח מול הממשלה או מול גופים אחרים, ובצורה יחסית ניטרלית. כלומר, זה לא גוף מסחרי שלכולם ברור מה האינטרס שלו. יש גוף שהמטרה שלו זה לקדם קוד פתוח. בשנים שאני חבר המקור, נדמה לי מ-2004 או 2005, הייתי בכל מיני אירועים ומקומות שהייתי צריך להגיד, אני נציג עמותת המקור, וזה פתח דלתות. וזה נכון גם בגופי ממשלה, זה נכון גם בשיחות עם חברות. זה נכון אגב עבור חברי עמותה אחרים שהשתתפו בדיונים על חוק זכויות יוצרים ב-2007, כדי לוודא שהחוקים ביחס למחשבים לא דרקוניים מדי. זה משמעותי, כשעמותה יחסית צעירה מגיעה לייצר פעילות כזאת. וזה חלק מהלופ הזה, שאחרי תוכנה חופשית מכירים את הרישיונות ואכפת להם מזכויות יוצרים. זה לא רק איזה משהו ששמור חברות טלוויזיה, קולנוע וכולי, שמשתמשים בזה לכיוון מאוד מצמצם, אלא דווקא לאלה שלוקחים להפוך את זה למשהו מאוד רחב. החל מ-2010-2011 התחילו כנסים ופעילויות של כל מיני, אנחנו קוראים לזה תתי קהילות כאן, מכניסים את זה בתור הקהילה הכללית של כל פתוח בישראל, ויש קבוצה שמתעניינת בפרויקט מסוים, לדוגמה כנסי אובונטו, שבזמנו בעיקר עשו מפגשי משתמשים עם פיצות ושתייה על הדשא בפארק הירקון. זה מה שהגניב אותם לצאת מהפורומים ולהיפגש פנים לפנים. מפגשים שחלקם היו גם קהילתיים וגם טיפה מסחריים, כמו דרופל, וורדפרס וצ'ומנה, שלפחות שניים מהם ממשיכים לקרות כל שנה עד היום, כלומר שנה שביעית. יוזמה שהגיעה מכיוון שונה לחלוטין, ואגב מתחבר לתהליכים שהצגתי מקודם, זה כנסי מגזר הביטחון. כנסים שלוקחים חברות מהתעשייה הביטחונית, מהצבא ועוד כל מיני גופים קשורים. אומרים בואו נדבר, אנחנו לרוב מתחרים, לרוב הדברים שלנו הם מסווגים, אנחנו לא יכולים להציג אותם לאף אחד, ואם כן נדרשים עכשיו חודשיים-שלושה של בירוקרטיה מהקב"ט כדי להציג אותם ולדבר איתם, חתימת מסמכים, פתאום אומרים רגע, אנחנו יכולים להציג את זה ברמה נמוכה, ברמה טכנולוגית של קוד פתוח. זה מה שאפשר לשתף בקלות, זה לרוב בלתי מסווג. אולי השימוש הספציפי שאנחנו עושים בכל אחד מהדברים האלה, או לצורך מה אנחנו משתמשים, הוא מסווג, אבל הטכנולוגיה עצמה היא לא. זה תהליך שמאוד משפיע, ופתאום רואים איך מתחרים, יכולים לשתף פעולה. עכשיו, בארץ זה קורה החל מ-2011, בארצות הברית זה קורה בשנים שלפני כן. זה אחד הדברים שלדוגמה, עמי שיושב פה הביא את זה בזמנו לתעשייה אווירית ואחרי זה לקהילה באופן כללי. אבל הרעיון שמתחרים יכולים לשתף פעולה זה בדיוק אחד הדברים שדוחפים את החדשנות של הקוד הפתוח. אני מסתכל רגע, ותסלחו לי על הבאזוורדס, אבל גם עולם המשין לרנינג וגם עולם הביג דאטה, שקצת מורידים את השכבה הנוצצת של יחסי הציבור או של הבאזוורדס, אם המשקיעים ומסתכלים מה קורה שם בפועל, זה הכל קוד פתוח. וזה הכל קוד פתוח שמגיע לחברות שונות, שכל אחת מוסיפה, צורכת ומוסיפה על משהו שהמתחרות שלה עושים. מסתכלים מה יש מאחורי הקלעים, אפילו של הדברים האלה. הרוב מאחורי זה לחלוטין קוד פתוח, אפשר לקחת, אפשר להעתיק. והיום כשהרבה אנשים מדברים עם גופים עסקיים או חברות ששואלות למה לעשות קוד פתוח, וקודם כל מזכיר להם, אתם כבר עושים קוד פתוח, פשוט לא קוראים לזה קוד פתוח, ולפחות לחצי מכם יש את זה בכיס. הם גם עושים את זה כשאתם גולשים באינטרנט ובעוד כל מיני הזדמנויות. אבל הסיבה הכי חשובה כדי לאמץ את זה היא החדשנות. והיכולת גם לא להיות תלויים במישהו ספציפי. היום אתם עושים משהו עם ספק אחד, עם הספק הזה, או פושט רגל, או מחליט שהוא מעלה לכם את המחירים יותר מדי, או מה שזה לא יהיה. אם אתם מבוססים על קוד פתוח, אתם יכולים לעבור למישהו אחר, וזה מאוד משמעותי. והעניינים האלה של גם חדשנות וגם נעילת ספקים, מביאים אותי לשקף הבא, וזו רשימה ולחלוטין לא מלאה בשום צורה, כי אין לי שום דרך למלא את זה, יש המון חברות שפועלות מתחת לרדאר. זה חברות שהתעסקו, חלקן לא קיימות, בצורה זאת או אחרת בקוד פתוח בישראל, ואני שוב אומר, זה לא רשימה ממצה, אני אשמח אגב לתוספות, יותר מאשמח. יש הרבה דברים שקשורים לעולם הקוד הפתוח, אבל לא תמיד זמינים, נגיד, לא כולם שכלים את הקוד בגיטהאב, או קל לעקוב אחריהם בגלל מדורי הכלכלה של החברות, של העיתונים הגדולים. לדוגמה, PF1, חברה שעבדה בישראל באמצע שנות ה-90, התעסקה בתמיכה בהפצות לינוקס. תחשבו שבתקופה ההיא, הפצות לינוקס, כאילו, זה דבר מאוד חדש. קיימות אולי 3 היו קיימות אז ושרדו עד היום. עם שינויים גדולים. רדט, דביאן, שאז לא מסחרי, אז פחות ימצאו ספקים שתומכים בזה באופן פורמלי. סלקוור ועוד כמה דברים כאלה. וזה היה הביזנס שלהם, שנים אחר כך הם יותר עברו לתחום הסקיוריטי. זן, החברה שהיא חברה ישראלית, שהממציאים שלה המציאו את PHP, קרה ב-97-8, יצרו חברה מעל זה ב-99. פעילות שקורית לחלוטין בישראל, מה שתקלינו על זה 20 שנה אחר כך, עדיין מפעיל אחוז מאוד מאוד ניכר מהאינטרנט. וורדפרס לבדו מפעיל בין 30 ל-40% מאתרי אינטרנט בעולם, כולם מבוססי PHP, תוסיפו לזה את הדרופל ועוד כמה מערכות תוכן, שלא לדבר על דברים ייחודיים. PHP מכסה אחוז מאוד גדול, אמנם יש לו פייט יפה עם JavaScript, אבל זה סיפור אחר. אדובה, חברה שאפשר למצוא היום רק בארכיונים, התחילה מטיפול בעולם היוניקסים, ואחרי זה עברה גם לעולם הלינוקס, להכניס לזה שירותי תמיכה, בעיקר סביב פאץ' מנג'מנט, גם תחזוקה וגם אבטחה. מישהו רוצה להבין איפה חברות נכשלות, זה יכול להיות מחקר מעניין של איך לעשות דברים. ואחד הדברים שאני מסתכל על זה בדיעבד, אגב, הייתי צעיר מדי, אני מכיר אנשים שעבדו שם, אבל הייתי צעיר מדי לעבוד שם, זה להבין כמה יכולת לעשות את הדברים בשקיפות ובצורה של קהילה היא משמעותית. אם אתה עושה הכל בבית ולא מחזיר קוד לאחרים, זה יכול להיות נטל מאוד גדול על החברה. אגב, היום יכול להיות שאדובה היה, שוב אני מקצין, היה יכול להסתכם בשלושה גיט ריפלוס שמנוהלים טוב, עם כמה תרומות של אנשים, וזה CI שנראה ממש מגניב. בשלב הזה זה לא היה קיים, בטח לא בטכנולוגיה של אז. R של מטריקס, סליחו לי. רשמתי אותם, למרות שמטריקס היא חברת שירותים ולא חברת קוד פתוח, הם דחפו מסחרית את רדט בשלב מאוד מאוד מוקדם, ועזרו להרבה ארגונים להיכנס לעולם הזה, בעיקר ארגונים גדולים, חלקם כבדים, מוסדיים וכו'. ולכן החלטתי להזכיר אותם. הם צמודים לקומרנט, שזה איזשהו סטארט-אפ ישראלי, שנמכר לרדט והבסיסו נוצר המרכז פיתוח של רדט. אחת הסיבות שרדט מובילים בעולם הווירטואליזציה, זה סטארט-אפ שהתחיל משהו שנקרא KVM, אמולציה. הנושא של אמולציה ווירטואליזציה עם איזשהו אוברהד יחסית קטן. אני לא אנסה להיכנס למושגים הטכניים של אנשי רדט, כי אני לא שולט בזה מספיק טוב, אבל היום זה התגלגל, או הגלגולי המשך של זה, זה מה שאתם מכירים אחרי זה בתור קונטיינרים, ובתור היכולת להריץ פלטפורמות אחת בתוך השנייה. זה הגלגול המוקדם לזה שהתחיל לפני, זה נמכר לפני כמעט 10 שנים, אז תחשבו כמה חדשנים הם התחילו. אגב, יש גם חברי קהילה בישראל, לדוגמה מולי בן יהודה, שהתעסק עם נושא של לינוקס בקרנל, ובמימון ה-IBM עוד בתחילת שנות ה-2000, וגלעד בן יוסף שהוזכר מקודם, שהגיע להרצות בכנסי קוד פתוח בשלב מאוד מאוד מוקדם מבחינת הקהילה, מבחינת הכנסים האלה. זאת אומרת, דברים שהתחילו בארצות הברית, בוא נגיד, 99-2000, והישראלים מתחילים להופיע שם ב-2002-2003 והלאה. דן אלוני, שהמציא יכולת או איך להריץ לינוקס ווינדוס בו זמנית, כפרוססינג בו זמנית, והיה הישראלי הראשון שבכלל הגיע להרצות על הדברים האלה בכנסים בחו"ל ברמת הקרנל. אגב, הוא היה אז, לדעתי, איפשהו בין סוף תיכון למשהו בשלבים הראשונים שלו של לימודים אקדמיים בתור התעודה צבאית. חברות כמו JFrog, שמתעסקות בנושא של איך לנהל את הקבצים שלכם ומערכות בנייה, כאילו קבצים שנוצרים כתהליך הבנייה, ומערכות של artifacts שנוצרים תוך כדי. חברה, אגב יושבים נדמה לי בנתניה, זה חברות שכשאתה מסתכל על זה, אתה אומר, כאילו, אם לא הייתי מכיר את העובדים שלהם, לא בטוח הייתי יודע שהם ישראליות, הן פועלות בשוק הזה בצורה בינלאומית. הקהל שלהם הוא בדרך כלל מחוץ לישראל, וזה נכון גם לגבי סקיילה דיבי, שהם הם עובדים בצורת פרויקט קוד פתוח, הם רוצים לממש יותר טוב פרויקט קוד פתוח אחר של אפאצ'י, במקרה הזה קסנדרה, ואתה רואה איך יש מלחמה גם בתוך עולם הפתוח, מלחמה במובן החיובי של כל הזמן לשפר. וחברה אחת יכולה לבוא להגיד לחברה אחרת, רגע, יש לי המצאה טובה, ולנסות במרכאות להשתלט על השוק הזה ולתת שירותים מסחריים מעל. לינובייט מוזכרת פה כחברה שהתעסקה רוב השנים עם דרופל ו-PHP, אבל היא מופיעה ברשימה הזאת כי הם אלה שהמציאו את תשתית, או את תשתית המין, תשתית שחלק גדול מתשתיות הג'אווה-סקריפט מתבססות עליה. המצאה ישראלית זה משהו שאתה מסתכל על זה בעולם, אתה אומר, כן, היום זה נראה ברור מאליו. לפני 5 שנים זה לחלוטין לא ברור. Redis Labs, שלקחו את המפתח של הפרויקט קוד פתוח והחליטו להציע לו עבודה ובנו חברה מחוץ לפרויקט הקהילתי, ואחרי זה אימצו גם את הפרויקט וגם את המפתחים, שזה מודל עסקי מאוד מעניין. סניק, סליחה. הייתי כן? תודה רבה. צודק. שמציעים שירותי בדיקה לקוד שלכם, כרגע בעיקר גיטאב, ומציעים תיקון, מזהים בעיות אבטחה, ומציעים להם כל מיני פאצ'ים. דברים שאני מחזיק מאגרים של גם שלי וגם של כמה גופים, ואני שמח לראות שיש משהו שסורק את הכל ומציע לי, או מזהיר אותי מפני בעיות עתידיות. ironSource, כשיודעים להריץ בדיקות על הקוד וגם להזהיר מפני בעיות אבטחה, יודעים לעשות דברים יותר מתוחכמים ברגע שהם סורקים את הקוד. התחילו בכלל מעולם הבדיקות של הליגל, עברו לדברים של יותר של תחזוקה וכו'. איגווזיו, שטוענים שבעולם הביג דאטה וההדופ יש בעיות בסיסיות ומציעים פתרונות שונים לאיך להתמודד איתם. מבחינתם הם רוצים להחליף את הדופ. שאיפה מאוד יפה לחברה קטנה. מצד שני, כשאתה עוקב אחריהם, הם כבר לא דברים כאלה קטנים, ויודעים לחדש ולהציע פתרונות יפים. רציתי להוסיף את פרוג'ומי, בתוך חברה של רוב האנשים, היא מתחת לרדאר, אנונימית לחלוטין, אבל יש להם תוסף וורדפרס, שהוא אחד מהתוספים הכי נמכרים בעולם לוורדפרס. וזה מדהים לראות איך 5 חבר'ה שפעם היו מהקהילה הזאת. אני יודע ממי הם למדו את ה-PHP שלהם לפני 15 שנה. כן? בדיוק כמו שאני יודע מי בקהל פה, ויש פה את הבן אדם שלימד אותי PHP לפני יותר שנים. כלומר, הקטע הזה של קהילה ועסקים הוא מדהים. בן אדם בא ואומר לך, רגע, אתה עזרת לי כשהייתי תיכוניסט, חייל משוחרר, לא משנה, סטודנט לתואר ראשון, כן, ולראות את הדברים האלה מתקדמים לחברות, זה מאוד מרשים. עכשיו, הרשימה הזאת, זה כדי קצת לגרות אתכם אינטלקטואלית. תבינו שמאחורי כל חברה כזאת יש המון אנשי קוד פתוח שעושים את הדברים האלה בארץ. חלקם לחלוטין על הרדאר וברור מה הפעילות שלהם וכו', וחלקם אנשים שלהם ולקוד פתוח אין שום קשר, הם לא בהכרח מתעסקים בפילוסופיה, אבל הקוד שלהם משוחרר לקוד פתוח כי זה המדיניות של החברה. אני מסתכל הרבה פעמים במסגרת החברה שלי על מודעות דרושים ועל מי דורש ניסיון בקוד פתוח. אני כאן בכל מיני חברות שהדבר האחרון שהייתי מצפה שהם יתעסקו בקוד פתוח, לרבות לשחרר אותו. כל חברות ביטוח, כל מיני גופים גדולים, ואני לא מדבר רק על לינקדאין, פייסבוק, טוויטר וכולי, שדי ברור שמתעסקים על קוד פתוח ומשחררים את זה. וגם על גופים, אתה אומר, זה לא האינסטינקט הראשון שלי. אני אחזור רגע ללופ מבחינת גם עסקים וגם של הקהילה. נסגור מעגל מול הג'אווה-סקריפט שהתחלנו ממנו עם נטסקייפ. אז אפשר לראות שאנשים היום כשהם נכנסים לשוק, בכוונה מתייחס לשוק הזה של ג'אווה-סקריפט, מסתכלים על העולם הזה של קוד פתוח ואומרים, מה השאלה בכלל? תמיד היה, כאילו, זה נראה לי טריוויאלי לחלוטין. הם לא מכירים בהכרח את ההיסטוריה, היא לא תמיד, גם אם הם מכירים, היא לא תמיד מעניינת אותם. אבל מבחינתם, לעבוד בגיט, על גיטה, כשכל העולם מסתכל לך על הקוד, כשאתה יכול לקחת קוד מכמעט כל פרויקט חדשני באינטרנט, ואפילו מנסים להציע לך אותו, זה נראה להם טריוויאלי, המשמעות של קוד פתוח באופן כללי, ואני מאוד מקווה שבישראל זה יגיע גם לגופים המוסדיים והגדולים, ולא רק יישאר נחלתם של חברות ההייטק. נראה לי שיצחק בא עם מקל ומוריד אותי מהבמה.
לא.
שאלות?
זה נשמע שאתה בפיניש.
אני בפיניש. שאלות? תוספות? הערות? תודה רבה.
תודה. תודה רבה, ליאור. Thank you, Lior. We have pizza. We're going to let you have the pizza in 2 minutes. But if there's one thing that you could take from this evening that you didn't know before, it would be to be made aware of Hamakor, which is the local nonprofit whose mission statement is the world of open source software. So I'm going to let Tomer introduce him. It's really important. He's on the way to the pizza afterwards, so make sure to stop by the booth here.
טוב, ערב טוב לכולם. אז באמת שמי תומר. אני בדיי ג'וב שלי, אני בכלל מפתח ברדט. אגב, הכל בקוד פתוח, אז אתם יכולים להיכנס לגיטהאב שלי לראות מה עשיתי בשנים האחרונות. אבל חוץ מזה, בזמני הפנוי אני מכהן כחבר ועד בעמותת המקור. אני לא אגזול הרבה מזמנכם, כי הפיצות פה מתקררות וכולם כבר עם הראש שם, גם ככה. אז ליאור קצת סיפר עלינו, העמותה קיימת כ-15 שנה, הוקמה ב-2003, באמת המטרה שלה זה להיות בית של קהילת הקוד הפתוח בארץ. אנחנו מקיימים מדי שנה כמה כנסים, ארוך הטווח שבהם זה אוגוסט פינגווין שמתקיים השנה בשנה ה-15, כנסים של הקהילות הביטחוניות מתקיימות במסגרת המקור, כנסים של פייפון, של וורדפרס, של דרופל, זאת אומרת באמת מהווים איזשהו בית לכנסים של קהילות קוד פתוח שונות שפועלות בארץ. חוץ מזה אנחנו מקיימים גם מפגשים מדי חודש, יש כל חודש מפגש פיתוח שבאים בשעות הערב, בעצם במטרה לעבוד באופן חברתי כל אחד על פרויקט הקוד הפתוח שאהוב עליו, לפעמים ביחד, לפעמים כל אחד עם עצמו, אבל בעצם ליצור גם את המפגש החברתי סביב הפרויקטים האלה. אתם יכולים לחפש אותנו במיטאפ, Open Source and Free Software in Israel, ולהתעדכן בכל המפגשים האלה, לעקוב אחרינו בטוויטר. כמו שליאור הזכיר, גם הבוקר ראינו פירות של נייר עמדה שהגשנו לפני שנה בערך, שהיו שותפים לו כ10 חברים מהקהילה. באמת, גם בעבודה השותפת שלנו אנחנו פועלים בקודים של קוד פתוח, והנייר הזה חובר בצורה של קוד פתוח על ידי הקהילה, והוגש לממשלה, וראינו היום את ההתחלה של הפירות שלו. זהו, מוזמנים לגשת אלינו אחר כך פה לדוכן, לקחת סטיקרים. מי שרוצה לתמוך בפעילות שלנו מוזמן להירשם גם כחבר או ידיד העמותה, לקבל אפילו איזה פיג'ט קיוב קטן כזה נחמד. זהו, מוזמנים לאכול פיצה, תיאבון.
Nuts and bolts. If I know, okay, now I understand what open source is. What can I do with it? And then there's going to be birthday cake for those who haven't run away. And for those that do, you're going to miss the birthday cake. And then Steve Walli is going to give a talk about the business implications of open source, how to do open source the right way and how not to do it the wrong way. So, why? Why give back to open source? Why be a part of it? So, if you're listening, if you're here, you probably already decided that open source interests you and want to give back. We use open source increasingly in our lives. Our mobile devices, our personal computing equipment, browsers, the software that we use to get to the internet, which is where everything is these days. Almost every single major browser is based in part at least on open source. Major components of big operating systems, and most of the biggest technologies that power the net and the cloud and all the buzzwords that we have today. Open source powers this all.
מה זה המושג?
The Apache Software Foundation. So what's in it for you? Well, hopefully altruism, right? We start with the fact that you're here because you care about open source. So, and you know, it's a cheeky line, but the truth is there's something to it. Has anyone here ever done like volunteer work, like volunteered at a hospital or an old age home, or painted, you know, some sheltered kid's place? And you go, you do the volunteer work, you feel so, if you haven't done it, go do it. It's really worthwhile. The feeling that you get when you do something for someone else and there's just no strings attached is an unbelievably good, warm, fuzzy feeling inside. But the truth is, you know, okay, so I've gone and helped paint in some children's shelter, and the thought, you know, occurred to me, is this really the most optimal use of my skills that I can give in this volunteer experience? Is there something that you know, a lot of people could come and paint. Is there something that I can do that no one else can do? And open source is a big part of that. I am a system architect by profession. I like dealing with technology problems. And giving back to open source is just a natural extension of the things that I would like to do anyways. And if altruism isn't good enough, then yes, there are other reasons you will get experience. I guarantee you that if you go on work, choose a random open source project, and do anything with it, you will get out of your comfort zone and you will learn experience that you would not get in any other place. Not only that, it looks great on your CV. Sometimes you get credit for the work that you do in open source, and that's really nice. The first stage that I got, my boss is here in the audience, I was accepted to the project management committee of the Apache web software. This was back in around 2001, 2002. And I was hounded within months by someone who said, I want you on my team. I need someone who's, you know, in Apache to be part of it. So it definitely helps on your CV. And even indirectly it helps on your CV. ironSource is a pretty big organization. We have, I think, 500-600 people just here in the Israel office. And when we're hiring people, our HR people start looking, in R&D, they will look for GitHub, they will look for code that you've written, they will look for signs of life, social signals, not just Facebook, but GitHub. And it matters. So it'll help. So it'll help. All right, I want to get involved. Who is this open source person? How do I become part of it? What is it? Who's behind it? And when I talk about what's behind open source, I want to talk about the Pareto principle, which is known commonly as the 80-20 rule, or more accurately by Joseph Juran, which is the European-born American businessman that actually coined this term after an Italian philosopher, mathematician, I think, named Pareto. He calls it the law of the vital few and the useful many. And this law basically means that if you want to, if you take anything and quantify it, then the 80% of the bang will come from 20% of the buck. 20% of the contribution will have 80% of the effect. So in the open source world, this means that we have our open source heavyweights, and they are responsible for 80% of the quantitative sum of what we call today open source. And they're important. But equally important, somewhat in contrast to the Pareto principle, I'm going to say equally important are these other 20%. And these other 20% are the lightweight open source contributors. And so what's the difference? Okay, so it's really nice, yeah, heavyweight, lightweight. What's the practical difference? The heavyweights are domain experts. people know what domain expertise means here? Domain expert is someone that knows everything there is about whatever the subject matter is. And domain expertise is really good and really important. If you would go and speak to Linus Torvalds about some, itty-bitty part of the Linux kernel, and you didn't really know your stuff, you'd be in for a bashing, because he is a domain expert on the kernel, and he's going to tell you 20,000 things that you didn't know, and you're just going to be like, okay. That's a domain expert. But domain expertise isn't good enough. Just knowing the ins and outs of the kernel is not enough to make open source a success. And I'll tell you a little story, well-known parable, whatever, that could express this. There was this company that had this really expensive, think $200,000 piece of machinery. And this was responsible for a core part of their business. And one day this machine broke. It just, you could picture the steam valves and everything, and it's going, and something, and everything stops. That's their business. They're not making money. What do? They're going to go to the people that they bought this $200,000 piece of machinery from, and they're going to say, by God, you fix this for me. And that's what they did. And the people came, and they tinkered, and they couldn't figure it out. So what do? They look, and they look, and they look, and they look, and they find that there are some other, they're not the only person in the world that has this $200,000 piece of equipment. They find someone else who they heard a story, they had a similar problem. They say, okay. They go to the company that they heard that had this problem. They say, we really want the person who fixed it for you. Can you we'll pay whatever you need, have them come fix it. They agree. The person comes, he listens to the machine, he tastes the machine, he's into, within 5 minutes, he's like, guys, I know what your problem is, I need a hammer. They give him a hammer, they're like, are you sure? This is he's like, I'm sure, don't trust me, right? You brought me to do this to fix it. And he goes over to the corner of the machine, he uses a wrap, and the machine just, it comes back to life. Everyone's ecstatic. They say, this is great, okay, how much do we owe you? He's like, $50,000. They're like, whoa! What do you mean? He's like, well, would it help if I give you an itemized invoice? They're like, sure. He gives them the itemized invoice, tapping the machine to make it work, $50. Knowing exactly where to tap and how hard to tap to fix it and not break it, $49,950. The company who produced this $200,000 equipment, they are the domain experts. They know, they built the machine. This person that fixed it is something that I like to call a subdomain expert. He doesn't have necessarily broad knowledge of the entire field, but he has a piece of specific working knowledge, something that domain experts don't have. And he knows what he knows. He knows that little area, and he knows it really well. He knows it so well that typically he knows it better than the domain expert did. And that's why the Pareto principle and all aside, I'd like to state that the lightweight open source contributors are not only important, they're a vital part of any piece of open source software that actually wants to be successful. So that's the theoretical difference. What's the practical difference between the domain experts and the subdomain experts, or our heavyweights and our lightweights? Well, quite frankly, going back to the Pareto principle, 80% of the heavyweights get paid a lot of money by corporations to sit and diddle on open source software. They get paid for it. Not everyone gets paid for it. Not everyone originally gets paid for it. There's the path from the subdomain expert. How do you get paid for it from day one? Well, you start as a subdomain expert and you work your way up. And a lot of people think, I've heard stories from people, I remember myself, 17, 18 years ago when I was first getting my feet wet in open source software, which it wasn't even called back then. It was intimidating. I mean, what do I know? I'm a freshman in college. But it's possible. And I want to share a story of a friend, someone I'd like to call a friend. This is John Lewis McGibney. I met John Lewis McGibney at Heathrow Airport. This would have been in 2011. We were on the way to ApacheCon 2011, which is the Apache Software Foundation's annual conference, which was hosted that year in Vancouver. By the way, we were talking about, altruism and love and all that. There was another guy that I met that I knew that I was going to meet at Heathrow Airport because the people at Apache said, hey, you guys are all traveling together, you should look for each other. His name, he was an Egyptian, and this was, when all the riots were happening in Egypt, named Mohammed Nur el-Din. Now, we're in an Israeli culture. This was at the height of problems inside Egypt, tensions between Egypt and Israel. And this is the name of the guy that I'm told to meet. I think, to my shame, I did have that instant, and then it went by and it became replaced by a feeling of curiosity. But I think in almost any other context I would have been in, that would have been something that scared me. And it didn't, except for the original, 1 second. It really intrigued me, and Nur, as I came to know him afterwards, he's an amazing guy also. But I'm not here to talk about Nur, I'm here to talk about Louis. Louis, in 2009, had a master's degree in civil engineering and was doing his PhD in in engineering informatics. And that in normal English and not gobbledygook meant that he worked in construction. Like the building that we're in, you all came from the lobby, you saw what's going on down there. That was his thing, construction. No computer background, no computer science, no nothing. And in his thesis, one of the things that he was dealing with was the fact that a large part of any construction project is the communication between a lot of people, a lot of different contractors that are coming to do different things. And he was saying that to increase the efficiency in physical construction, it's really important to be able to find the information that you're looking for really fast. So he went out to the internet and he found a project that was done by the Apache Software Foundation called Lucene, which was a free text search engine, and he started poking around. He taught himself C and Java all by himself. And when I met him, this was 2 years later, on the way to ApacheCon, he had already become a core member of the Apache Nudge project, which to this day I don't remember exactly how it was related, because Nudge is a piece of software that crawls websites, and what that could have had to do with him finding information for his contractors, I'll leave it to your imagination, but there it was. That was his drive, and he did it. And I thought his story was amazing. When I decided that I was going to do this slide deck, I wrote to him, I'm like, Louis, can I feature you in this slide deck? He's like, why me? I said, because you're really cool because of what you've done. Because what he'd done in the years after that is he became a core contributor to over 15 projects in the Apache Software Foundation, some of which are our code, like NE23 and Gora and CTakes is actually writing code, and a lot of them were logistical projects like the Apache Incubator or the Apache Travel Systems Community or the Apache Community Development Community. And he's done a lot. And that brought him from the subdomain expert for someone who wanted one specific thing. He just gave, and he was noticed, and he learned a ton of skills, and his life is completely different now. He's one of us now. He's not, construction. He's one of us. So hopefully I've convinced you that it is hypothetically possible that you can help, and at this point you want to help, and you know that you can help, and you're hopefully interested in how do you do it. So there are a whole bunch of ways. Bug reports. One of the biggest problems, one of the biggest places where you could show subdomain expertise is with bug reports. People that write big software like Kubernetes or Linux, or I'm not even going to start with names because I'll just get nowhere. They don't know the kind of crap that you people are dealing with on an everyday basis as using their software. And unless you help them and give them detailed bug reports, they never will know. And just a word that I want to add here, there's a balance, because as I'm going to get to a little bit later, I don't want anyone to overcommit and really burn themselves out. The open source is not supposed to be that difficult. I'm not going to say that it's easy, but it is simple. And to stay involved, you have to actually have some enjoyment work you're doing. And it's understandable that if you give a bug report and they don't look at it for 2 years, you'll kind of lose the context and you won't be able to help. But try. My one request to you is try, keep whatever bug thing that you can, try to get as generic you can, give them the bug report. They won't find it on their own. People think that someone else will report it. It's not true. I'll give an example later on. It's not true that someone else will always report it. Another thing that we could do, especially when we speak another language, is localization. Help translate a project into your language. There are so many projects out there. I'm sure everyone here has, their pet things that they know that they use, from their cell phone to their web browser to home automation to I don't even want to begin to think of it. How many people are okay with the fact that I'm speaking in English? Raise your hand. Okay. How many people still secretly wish it would be so much nicer if he was doing it in Hebrew? Come on, be honest. Be honest. People like to be communicated with in their mother tongue. It's a thing. Other people are going to have the thing. Other people who maybe didn't make it here this evening just saw the fact that the program was in English and they're like, whoa, not for me. So localization is a huge thing that you could do. It's really easy. Most of you here probably know English well enough and Hebrew well enough that you can do that. A lot of you know other languages. It's really easy to do. If you want to get involved, talk to the people over there, talk to me, talk to a lot of people here who will help you get going. When Google doesn't know, when I have a problem, the first thing I do is I ask Google. Usually Google's nice to me. Google is a multi-billion-dollar company that puts a lot of money and effort into making sure that they're nice to me so that I'll keep asking. But at the end of the day, some questions just can't be answered by Google. And that's okay, because in the open source world, we don't really completely rely on Google to begin with. This is a little bit old-fashioned maybe, but we have things known as mailing lists or forums, places where you could just come and post it. Now people know Stack Overflow. People know Stack Overflow, right? So that's kind of the same thing as forums and user lists. IRC, for people who remember what that is. Slack, if you don't know what IRC is, it's Slack minus a lot of cool stuff that Slack put into it. Almost every open source project has their own dedicated venue of a place where they will try to serve their users and answer their questions. There are a lot of huge projects where you will find on these mailing lists people who have never written a single line of code but are considered some of the most respected members of that community because all they do is they put themselves out there for the new users and they will answer the questions. And often, they don't know the answers to the questions, but they will learn the answers to the questions because it helps the other people and it helps them. It makes them smarter. Remember, getting out of the box and earning a lot of experience that you wouldn't necessarily have on your own. Patches, right? Okay, this is an absolute classic. We live in a day where GitHub is home to a lot of software. So even software that it's not home to, it's like a home away from home. People mirror their stuff there. It's really easy to put patches and help actually contribute code or images or content or whatever happens to be the nature of that project directly back to the project. Not bug report, but this is a bug report and here's the fix for the bug report. And I want to talk about a story that happened to me just a few months ago. Here, one of the DevOps people in the DevOps group that works in my organization, they were giving Kubernetes a try. We ended up not going with it for a whole bunch of reasons, but they were giving it a try, and they found some little configuration thing that didn't quite work the way they wanted it to work, and so they forked and they changed it and they used it, and life was great. And they said, "Hey, Isaac, look what I did," and I said, "Great. Did you send a pull request in?" And they were like taken aback. They're like, "Well, why would I do that?" I said, "Because you did something useful, so give it back." "Well, it's useful to me. That doesn't mean it's going to be useful to anyone else." And we had this discussion. At the end, I convinced him, go the extra mile, put the pull request in. And he puts the pull request in. And he's all excited because he, did a pull request to freaking Kubernetes. And nothing happens A week goes by, and 2 weeks go by, and a month and a half goes by, and he's kind of crestfallen on the inside, and I get that. Sometimes people don't notice your patches, and sometimes stories have a sad ending, but this story doesn't have a sad ending. Because a month and a half later, he gets an update on the GitHub patch saying, "We're so sorry, it took us so long to get, we were in a code freeze, and it's a great patch. We're sorry, we thought we told you in advance that we were going to be on a code freeze, and we neglected to write in your patch that we're in a code freeze and we'll only get to this next month. Thank you so much. It's been pulled into the master of Kubernetes." Wow, good for him. So he told me this, I said, "Great. Did you write an email to the everyone in our R&D department saying that you did this?" He said, "Why would I do that?" I said, "Because you contributed something to Kubernetes core. I mean, celebrate that." He said, "But it's this tiny little change. It's not such a big deal what I did." I said, "Yes, it's not necessarily, you don't see it as a big deal because you're the subdomain expert. Because for you, it's such a small thing. But with Kelsey Hightower and everyone at Google and the Linux Foundation, all the core people who are working in Kubernetes, no one did what you did. Only you. You were the only person that put in that request, and the domain experts reviewed your patch and decided this is worthy, this is something that we want, and this is something we wouldn't have thought of otherwise." So the point of this, patches are important, patches are welcome, and patches are critical. The subdomain expertise that you have is critical. The big projects don't know it on their own. And the last example that I want to bring up is this idea of it's not big enough. No one cares. It's so small. We have a bunch of Node.js programmers here. Who knows Node.js? Who works with Node.js, right? Okay. Who remembers this? Right. Okay. So the Node people know, everyone else is going to get an explanation. This is an 11-line module that was a programmer that did hundreds of other little tiny things just because he posted every little thing that he ever did to NPM. NPM is Node.js's major repository where you could just get pre-built modules. And this is one of the pre-built modules. It doesn't do very much. For people who don't understand JavaScript, what this does is it takes a string, a sequence of characters, and it trims the white space off of the left side of it.
Could you repeat that, please?
It takes a string, a bunch of characters, a string, and it trims the white spaces or enters off of the left side of the string. So if I have space hello world, and I feed it to this function, it'll return hello world without the space at the beginning. That is all that this piece of software does. Why is it interesting? Well, the guy who wrote it, Ezer Kuchulu, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right.
Turkey Hamezik.
Huh?
Turkey Hamezik.
Turkey, yeah. He had a little run-in with the corporate world. He had another piece of software. I don't even remember what it was called. Does everyone remember what it was called? Kit? Something like that? There was this other module that he had published to NPM, and the name that he chose collided with the name of this corporate, I think it was chat software. And the authors of these chat software came to him one day, and this was March 16th or so, 2016, and they said, "Look, we think you're awesome, but we have a product called this, and we think we want to release a Node.js module for our product called," let's say it was Kit. "And we think it'll be really easy for all of the users out there, the many users who know what Kit is, if our module is called Kit. So can you give us the name?" And he's like, "No." And they said, "Well, not to be a dick, but we could sue you over patent infringement." And he basically answered, "Well, you're being a dick, so F you, and I don't ever want to hear from you again." So what do? They said, "Well, we're not going to get anywhere with him. Let's go to NPM. Behind NPM, there's a corporation, and we're a corporation, and they're a corporation, I bet we'll get along just swell. And they go to NPM, they go to the people behind NPM, they tell them the problem, they say, look, there's, it's an issue of patent infringement, we want Kit. And the legal people at NPM decide that, well, there's a point, and okay. And they go behind this guy, behind Azer's back, they deregister his module Kit, and they give the ownership of Kit to them. Azer finds out about this a few days later, March 22nd, 2016. Those of us who work with Node.js, that is engraved in our brains, we will never forget it. Azer finds out, and he sends an open letter to the head of NPM, and he says, I can't believe that you would do, I thought you were one of us, and it's traitorous what you've done. And I want you to remove all of my modules from NPM, or if not, at least tell me how to do it. And he figures out on his own how to do it, and he removes everything from NPM, including LeftPad. Again, why do we care, Isaac? Well, LeftPad, even though it's this little 11-liner that I could probably write in 10 minutes, in the world of open source, people like these kind of things. People like not having to write 11 lines. So a whole bunch of people, like major parts of the Node.js ecosystem, like a project called Babel, who their purpose in life was to, give you future versions of JavaScript that would work everywhere, they decided we could use this. And when he unpublished this within hours, made websites search at everyone that had a dependency on this thing called Babel, which had an inside dependency on this thing called LeftPad, started breaking. Websites started. The line in the papers was the module that shut down the internet. I don't know how much of an exaggeration it was, but a lot of stuff, a lot of big sites went down, and there was this whole flame war, and the story came out, and yada yada yada. But the point is, don't be afraid of micro projects. How much time we got left? We have a little bit more time. Avishai, I'm wrapping up. One of the projects, when I started working with Node.js about 3-4 years ago here in ironSource, people know Atlassian, Jira, and Confluence and all that stuff? Yeah? No, I'm talking, all right, a few. So Atlassian has a product called, do people know what Jenkins is? All right, yeah, people know Jenkins. Bamboo is Atlassian, the company behind Jira. It's their version of Jenkins, basically. It's the same kind of thing. It costs money. But it's kind of cool. And Jenkins wasn't quite as big back then. Anyway, the point is, they are a Java shop. And when a big part of Jenkins is the ability to run unit tests and see the test reports and see the coverage. And I wanted to do this in Bamboo. And there was no way to do it with Node.js, except that Atlassian had published an open source beta version of this new plugin for Bamboo that could run Node.js. And I said, that's great. Now I could run my Node.js thing, but I still don't get the test coverage. There's a great plugin, great test framework for Node.js called Mocha. I'll go and I'll write a driver for this Mocha thing that will teach it to talk to Bamboo so that I can have nice, pretty reports, just like the big Java boys and girls get from my code. And I went and I wrote it. And I forked it, and the Atlassian people saw that I forked it because it was there, and it's open source. And wouldn't you know it, a year or so later, Atlassian brought the fork back into their code. It's now part of Bamboo. It's still open source, but it's a part. I actually don't even know if it's open source anymore because the plugin became an integral part of Bamboo. But that's not the cool part, or the part that at least freaked me out a little bit.
I hate using microphones, just so everybody's clear. I want to thank everybody for coming out. I do appreciate there's a certain irony to somebody from Microsoft talking about open source here. But bear with me. Hopefully I can give people something to chew on. I have a fairly eclectic background. I've been doing software for a long time. And so the Microsoft was just one company I worked for in a long period of time. I was doing real-time programming in the 80s. I was on the customer side of the house. So that was kind of where my memories were formed in this industry, so I don't trust vendors, even though I've worked for vendors for the last 2 decades, 3 decades now. I worked on the Unix standardization efforts, and that was when I decided I was going to try and found a company. And so a collection of us founded a company that was going to build a Unix face on Windows NT, because that was, we were going to put our money where our mouth was, kind of thing. And it was, for all intents and purposes, a BSD distro running on top of Windows. And the interesting thing is we actually had a source license to Windows. So this vectored in the same way that their POSIX subsystem did. So fork and exec were fork and exec, signals were real, the file system was real. All of your real Unix semantics were there on Windows NT. This wasn't kind of a Win32 shim library. We didn't make it. There was not fame and glory in it. After $8.5 million of other people's money, which wasn't bad in those days, we ended up getting acquired by Microsoft in an asset acquisition. Basically, they wanted their license back. But we got jobs out of it. So I went to work for Microsoft in '99, and I spent from '99 to 2004 there. I worked at our software, what was called Interix, became Services for Unix. I think it shipped all the way up through Windows 7 or 8 as the subsystem for Unix applications. But I stepped away from my product when it became clear that Microsoft wasn't entirely keen on it. Now, I was the Unix guy at Microsoft back at that period. And to demonstrate that maybe I don't know how to run my career very well, I decided to become the open source guy at Microsoft. And you have to remember, it's 2002. This is the height of the fear. I worked on a project called Rotor. Rotor was a source code publication of .NET and C#. It ran on Windows, obviously, Mac OS X, and FreeBSD, because we weren't allowed to say the L word back then. But it was interesting as we ran it like an open source project, but it was definitely not an open source project. It was a different license. After 5 years at Microsoft, I went out, I did other things. I consulted with the Linux Foundation, the Eclipse Foundation. I came back and consulted with Microsoft and others. I was the technical director at the Outer Kirk Foundation. So that was an open source foundation that Microsoft helped sponsor into existence to do open source, to support projects that were doing Microsoft technology related open source. I was a distinguished technologist at Hewlett-Packard in the cloud business unit. I got to watch a catastrophe in the open source world with respect to what happened with HP and Helium and the OpenStack project. Spent a year consulting at Docker. I jokingly, people say, "Oh, you work at Docker?" And I'd say, "No, I'm a consultant at Docker." I was doing things relating to the Open Container Initiative for them. And then I ended up rejoining Microsoft. Oh, I didn't turn it on. I told you I can screw hardware up constantly, even just forgetting to turn it on. I rejoined Microsoft in Azure Engineering just last September. And it's a very different world inside of Azure from the angry Windows division that I left 13 years ago. So with that as a background, that's what I'm bringing to talk to you about, because I always look at open source a little differently from other people. I joke that I'm always looking through the wrong end of the telescope, but that lets me see things differently. I think we have an optics problem when we talk about open source right now. And this optics problem means that a lot of the communities that get built aren't healthy communities. And a lot of the people that try and do open source related things in companies do a bad job of it. And so I kind of want to share what I think are the optics problems here. And they fall into 3 groups. There's a set of things that are just inherent in software. And if you don't understand that, you end up having a discussion about open source instead of having a discussion about improving the software process. And that can get kind of confusing, and everybody wants to bring their latest idea about open source into that discussion when you should be having a discussion about software. There's a set of things about community that we'll talk about that I just find are very frustrating, because people seem to forget that as people who live in the real world of atoms, and we're social animals, we know how communities work. I used to joke with folks, we knew how communities work since you had a campfire and I wanted to sit beside it. So there's no mystery here, but when we get into the open source world, all of a sudden we think that somehow the digital world behaves differently. And then there's a set of business troubles. And this is where things like Helion happened, and it was insane to watch HP spend hundreds of millions of dollars failing at open source. So let's talk about the software problems. So I am very old-fashioned when it comes to software. I believe in software engineering construction discipline. It scares some people, but there you have it. That's how you build software. I want to talk a little bit about Linus's law, and we'll touch on security, and then the wonderful world of intellectual property around patents and copyright taint. So there's no scale without discipline. And what I mean by this is you cannot build a scaled out community without some of this, just the simple automation discipline that you use to build good software. There are a set of things that we do that are about automation and not about people. This is all the version control and configuration management work that we do. This is having make files or build files of some kind. It doesn't have to be make, but you need some kind of recipe that is fully automated, so at the end of the day, the developer types make and make test and is in a no-win state. And if you can't do that, your community can't scale. And it's no different with products. In the product world, you end up in that space. You can't support thousands of customers unless you know exactly what that executable bundle is that they're working on. It works the same way on your websites. It works the same way everywhere. It's an artifact of software. It has nothing to do with how the software is licensed. And then you get to Linus's law. Now this is actually about people and not automation. So a man named Eric Raymond famously coined Linus's law. And he said, Linus's law says that all bugs are shallow given sufficient eyeballs. And this was coined 20 years ago at that kind of hype at the start of the open source definition and the start of the OSI. It was this idea, if we just had enough programmers working on this, bugs vanish quickly. And I think it's actually backwards. Again, going back to good software engineering discipline. Good software engineering discipline says you review the code before it gets checked in. And it's a very simple discipline. But there's actually studies out there that demonstrate you will find more bugs in review than you will in test. And that's because you have domain experts looking at the source code that they didn't necessarily write, that they're either carrying the domain expertise of that space, or at least the code expertise, and they find the bugs before they ever get out into production. So this is something that's very much about people. And so it's a software thing though. It's not really about the license and some magic that you get in the open source world. Again, it's just about building good software. Security. Security is just a set of things. It's a set of practices, it's tooling, it's expertise. It has nothing to do with how the software is licensed. Everybody wants to make this, open source is more secure, open source is less secure. I think I've worked for a company that said both of those things over the last 25 years. It's one of those things where it's a set of practices that you need to learn. A lot of people, there was a study, not a study, it was a large piece of work on open source was published 2 years ago now. And a lot of people refer to it. And they use both LeftPad as one of the examples that they talk about. And then they also talk about this whole problem with Heartbleed and shell shock. And oh my God, this open source stuff. This is a problem. We somehow need to make it more sustainable. And I have a problem with that. Because when I look at the Heartbleed thing, now I'm not a node developer. But if you told me that you were running your production website on software that you were dynamically loading off the internet, I wouldn't fire you the first time. But after LeftPad, you've had your warning. and I'd fire you the second time. Yeah, that's a software engineering discipline thing. We don't load our production websites dynamically off the internet. But in the Heartbleed space, it was the same kind of thing. Oh my God, this key library, the OpenSSL library, you know, the guys working on it were starving to death in a corner somewhere and they didn't have enough time to support it. How are we going to live with this? Well, the reality is an enormous number of vendors who should have known better got lazy. And they weren't paying these guys to maintain it, and they were happily using it. And it finally fell apart and it bit them. And the right thing happened in the industry. It was actually the Linux Foundation, as a reasonably nonpartisan group, circled the vendors up in a real hurry. They all kicked in the cash, and they started going through all of these key projects that just to make sure, like, are they still healthy? And that was the Band-Aid. And on the backside of it, a whole lot of folks have now been redoing OpenSSL, and there's, the right things have happened. But it's not an open source problem. I love intellectual property regimes. It'll be the death of us all. Though actually, I just want to be clear, do we have any lawyers here tonight? Excellent. Very brave of you for admitting it. Good for you. And actually, the best thing I'm going to say for you tonight is it's accountants that are actually going to be the death of us, not the lawyers. The thing about when you get into the open source space, people want to have this debate. And they want to have it about whether software patents are good or bad. I have an opinion, it's actually irrelevant. Customers don't care about patents. Nobody bought the Toyota over the Honda because they really liked Toyota's intellectual property schemes. Yeah. No, my Honda has more patents per ton. That's why I bought the Honda. Yeah, it's just not something that customers care about. It is something that companies need to pay attention to. It's the law. But it's not something to get too torn up about. The Free Software Foundation does a lot of advocacy in this space. I understand their concern. I am not belittling the concern at all. Patents absolutely can get in the way. But patents are also more of a ticket to a negotiation. I know what the law says they are. They say, it's this time-limited monopoly so that you can claim back the money that you've invested in all of those good things. But the reality is, it's a ticket to a negotiation. If you're not making a lot of money, whoever holds that patent is not going to come and harass you. They don't care. If you're making a lot of money, well, then you're going to have to learn about patents and have good lawyers. Because whoever holds the patent is going to come. But it's not as bad as you think. I once had this discussion with a guy who claimed to have the patent. This was about 2000, 2001. He claimed to have the foundational patent for web services. Basically, yes. I have the patent on the internet. And he thought somehow that this was going to make him incredibly rich. He'll just get, that 10th of a shekel off every single transaction, and it will be rich. And all I could think of is, oh, you poor man. Because this was, literally in a newspaper article. And, you're basically standing there telling IBM, Sun Microsystems in the day, and Microsoft's lawyers, come and get me. It's a ticket to a negotiation. Back in that period of time, if you had a fundamental patent if you had a patent that looked like it might be a fundamental patent on something, because we'll never know until the judge tells us, then certain very large vendors would probably write a $2 million check for you. They just don't want to go through the hassle. Yeah, it looks like it's a decent patent. So patents are something that we can all have opinions on them, but they're basically tickets to negotiations. And mixing it up in the open source space gets very messy very quickly and doesn't help anybody in terms of actually getting real work done. Licenses, You need to, if you're a software developer as a professional, you need to understand a little teeny tiny bit about copyright law. Again, it's the law. You got to put up with it. If you're an open source developer, the only thing I will tell you is you got to put a license on it. Sorry, it's the law. There's an enormous, I can't remember the exact numbers, but if there's 60 million repositories on GitHub, there's only something like 20 million of them have a license. That means there's 2/3 of GitHub you and I can't touch, really, without asking somebody for permission. And that, we'll talk about, is the brilliance of what Richard Stallman actually did, and their whole group of people. So these are all software things, but I actually want to give you that little bit of history that puts all of open source, to me, in perspective anyway, because I'm old. So here's the timeline. And the important thing to know about this is we have shared software literally since we've written it. This goes all the way back to 1950. The Institute of Advanced Studies, that's where the first programmable computer in America was being built. And at night, there was an Italian researcher doing genetics research, and he heard about this large calculating device. And so he started using it at night for his calculations, while von Neumann was doing big experimentation during the day. And they were sharing software. IBM starts doing big computers. What do they call their original conference for people that were doing big computer things? Because we didn't call them programmers yet. It was called Share. By the time you get into the 60s, you've got DECAS. DECAS conferences were all based on sharing software around DEC equipment. You get into the 70s, Unix tapes start moving around, and Usenix starts. And all of these, we're in a period where we don't have an internet yet. So our network is tape-sized packets and conference schedule latency. Or it would be events like this. Somebody in the corner would have a pile of disks or CDs, or pick your level of technology depending on when you were born. But a magical thing happens, and in 1980, US copyright laws apply to computer software. Now this is a problem, because that gets back into everybody has to ask for permission from everybody else. And for the next 20 years, there's an amazing amount of experimentation in the license space. MIT around Project Athena did the original licensing. We end up with the Berkeley guys following on the MIT footsteps. Stallman articulates software freedom. That's a licensing experiment. You get all the way up into Netscape. Netscape was the first corporate lawyers that thought, we need a better license than the thing that those academics are writing or those crazy political guys are writing. So they write an academic-based license, a corporate-based license. And that work, when the Apache Software Foundation kicks off in '97, that work is kind of replicated again. So there's just lots of licensing experimentation going on. And finally, in 1998, a group of people sat down and articulated what are the 10 attributes of a license that really define this thing for us. This kind of sharing, this kind of thing that allows us to do all of these great things with software without continuously asking permission from each other. And through that whole period, companies are doing the same kind of thing. It's never been hobbyists. Hobbyists are absolutely part of this. People working on their own are absolutely part of this, but companies have been doing it too, all the way along. DEC Ultrix, that was a BSD variant in its original days, so was SunOS. Project Athena was started off at MIT with DEC, IBM, and HP, doing all the X11 work, and then Kerberos. So these are, companies have been involved long before we had this definition. The problem is software is amazingly dynamic. The idea that they put copyright law on software, quite a bit of dumb idea. I mean, it probably seemed like a good idea at the time. Again, remember, we weren't living on a World Wide Web on top of an internet. I am old enough to remember, I worked for a small software company in 1991. We were still wild. filed the paperwork for our copyright on our product, we had to send in the first 17 pages of the printout. Don't know why it wasn't 18, don't know why it wasn't 16, it was 17. What I'm guessing is that the copyright form was probably 3 pages. It allowed them to bundle it in 20 pages. I don't know. You know, there's probably a filing cabinet limit or something that set this number of pages. But it was, you know, magically foolish for no reason at all. Software is amazingly dynamic. It's not like other copywritten things that are fairly static. Stallman's brilliant hack was to articulate not software freedom, and that is not disrespect on software freedom at all. It was to actually say, fine, I have to ask permission? No, you don't. Here's a license that says you don't have to ask permission. You just have to adhere to these three things. It's one of those things that is perpetuated through all of those experimentation. It is the thing that enables us to do open source. To me, it really comes down to the engineering economics. I can bore you all with a terrible story of dollars and cents on exactly how much money that I was saving, but understand it was orders of magnitude when we were doing our own, you know, Berkeley distro thing on Windows NT. What it really comes down to is it's software that's liberally licensed and collaboratively developed. That's what I think we should call it instead of open source. It's liberally licensed, collaboratively developed. In English, that does not roll off your tongue very well. I keep hoping for another language that it might, but I haven't found it yet. But that really is the licensing definition that we have in the OSI definition, and this idea of community. So let's talk about problems in community for a minute. Community troubles, I kind of sum up as these three. Nobody cares about your project. I agree with everything you said.
And I agree with that.
But there's this magic thinking out there that if I build this project, people will come and work on it with me. No, that's not the way it works. There's also no tragedy of the commons. People want to make, there's a tragedy of the commons. People should be coming to work on my project. I'm getting very tired of burning out. Nobody's coming to help me. There's a tragedy of the commons. That's not the way it works either. The one thing everybody has to internalize is freeloaders means you're doing it right. And we'll talk about that. So, in the real world, remember, we've known how communities work since you had the campfire and I wanted to sit beside it. In the real world, we all choose our community. We all pick the place we live. And we pick it because maybe the commute is convenient. Maybe it's a matter of where our kids are going to go to school. Might be one of those things where, you know, you have a particular place of worship that you care about. Might even be that, you know, you care about particular shopping, that you come from a cultural background and you need that grocery store somewhere close to you that's going to provide you the things that you need. But at the end of the day, we all pick our communities for very personal reasons. We have three kinds of neighbors in that community. First of all, you got the people just living there with you. You might be, obviously, you chose the neighborhood too. And I've walked people through this a number of times. I've walked community people through it, and that's always hysterical. So how many people in this room right now would know how to report a pothole or a burned out streetlight in your neighborhood? That's not bad. In a room full of communities, the community managers, I can get all the way up to maybe 20. It felt like there was about 20% of the room here. Basically, it's not a big number that actually know how to do this and actually do it. And not only that, there's that next step up in your community. I don't know if this English phrase means anything. The idea of a block party. So a block party, if you grew, my wife is English. I lived in England. There was a royal wedding, and it was the Queen's one of the significant birthdays. Everything shuts down for a day. Everybody in the neighborhood organizes block parties. somebody has to do that work. And sure enough, there's always one or two that want to organize the block party. In Canada, it was generally somebody wanted on Labor Day weekend, the first weekend in September, somebody's going to organize the block barbecue. In America, they do it on the 4th of July. It's just like somebody does that. But it's a much smaller group of people. My apologies. I thought I turned all the notifications off. Just thinking, what time is it in America? Oh God, email's going to start showing up soon. But so too in our software communities. There's a lot of people just want to use the software. And then there's that group of people that actually will give you bug reports. They'll fill in, issue requests, item requests, things like that. And then there's the people that actually start contributing. And the kicker here is it is orders of magnitude in the following of this. People that use your software, there was a GitHub survey just last spring, and it demonstrated that people using your software think they're part of your community. I'm a Node programmer, therefore I'm part of the Node community. Have you ever done anything else in that community? No, but I use it. We all identify with our tribes very clearly. And I'm not laughing at those people. They're essential because that's the growth that you want. And it really is, the rule of thumb of this orders of magnitude, I was sitting in an audience at a Usenix back like 2001. And the guy giving the talk at the front of the room was talking about his open source community, which was graphics drivers on Linux. This is in 2001. That was a very narrow community. And he said, oddly enough, the 9 people on the planet that know about video drivers on Linux are in my community. But he said, but for every 1,000 users, maybe we get 100 bug reports, maybe 10 people give us a patch, Maybe one of them even read our contribution guidelines. And I happened to be sitting beside somebody who ran a very large open source community at the time. And I said, Eric, those numbers feel right? And he thought about it for a moment and he went, yeah, it's, 1,000, 100, 10, 1. They're good numbers. And I keep testing these anecdotally on people that run communities, and they all kind of go, yeah, that's about right. Freeloaders means you're doing it right. It's almost one of the most important things, and if you're in a company, this is very hard for your marketing and sales people. They'll want them to give something. I know we gave them the software for free, they have to give us something. No, freeloaders means you're doing it right. And the other thing is, people choose the communities that they care about. So if you build it, they will come, but they're going to be solving their own selfish needs in your community. And that's something that you need to be sensitive to. The commons thing, maybe a better way to talk about this horrible, problem is the burnout problem. This is where that discussion always comes up. Matthew Garrett is a security person in the Linux world. He hacks on toys as a hobby, and he's terrifying. He presently works at Google. But yeah, that was this idea of, that people are burning out. And I still keep in touch with the guy who runs the Wix community at Microsoft. And he was talking about this burnout problem as well. And it's like, just tell him no. It's like, if you build your community and you build it to scale, you're going to have times when there are burnout problems, and then you'll figure out what needs to be tuned in the process. But very small communities tend to suffer this problem because there's only a very small group of people working on it. And they tend to panic that, what if I don't solve every pull, what if I don't get to every pull request? That's a great problem, because that means they're giving you pull requests. It's the ones that actually get angry. I'm using all of your software that you gave me for free, and I want you to give me more. Just say no. It's that simple. But that's a very difficult thing for people to learn, especially if you are prone to sharing, which is what we're talking about here tonight, then it's hard to do that. So instead of maybe saying a hard no, you learn to say, thank you, could you please give me a pull request for that? That's a great idea. There's the source code. You could give me a pull request. But really what it's about is building, if you want to scale your project and community, you need to build 3 on-ramps. You need to basically, you need to grow the number of users, because that's where you're going to find your developers. You need to encourage those developers to experiment with your stuff. You need to make that easy, because those developers are the ones that are potentially going to give you your contributions. And then you need to encourage those contributions. Back in the horrible old days of software in a box that you sold, I worked for a company and we had the 10-minute rule. And the 10-minute rule said from the time the customer pulls the shrink wrap off the box until the software is loaded and did something simple but obvious and visible, you have about 10 minutes. Some companies in that era, this is the early 90s, some companies, they timed it down with the studies down to 7. But I'm willing to give you 10. So think about the last time you went to GitHub. Well-run projects, it's very obvious, download this. They may even have, they'll tell you the brew line if they have a Mac version available. They've got a Windows installer version if it runs on Windows, and they'll tell you how to do it in a line or two with the binaries on Linux. It's geared to make it trivial to get up and running. They will tell you, a good project will tell you how to build it from source way down at the bottom of the README. But the first thing they do is, this is how to, load this binary and you're there. That's really important, because if you get them there in that first 10 minutes, they'll probably give you another 10 minutes, and another after that, and another after that, as you make it better and better and better, and you kind of walk them down that tutorial. But that takes work, and that's a hard thing. But it really is, how do you make it blindingly easy on that first path to install it, configure it, and use it? Get that user up and running. How do you encourage developers? How do you make it blindingly easy to build it? So that rotor project that I was part of, now it was not an open source project. We were sharing out the source code under an academic license. But understand that the work we did allowed you to unpack a tarball, say build, and build test. And at that point, you would see 3 errors. That is literally the entire documentation we gave to people. And the next piece of documentation we gave them, the second screen, if you scroll down, was this is sort of how the directory tree lays out. Now remember, we're talking something as complex as the .NET runtime and the C# compiler. 24 hours later, we got the first righteous patch. Somebody who clearly understood chip and Intel chipsets said if you change these 15 lines, you'll get a 10% boost in performance. And they were right. So even though it's orders of magnitude, you can still get gold on day 1 because we made it blindingly easy for them to give it to us. On day 2, we got the first righteous bug fix, one of the 3 failing test cases on the front end of it. Somebody thought they'd go fix one of them. 4 hours later, we got a fix. Now understand, we were Microsoft early in our tenure, and we destroyed that community as quickly as we could. That's the downside of the story. And actually, understand how we did that. That code base was still tied to the product. This is 2002. It's the height of the fear. The fear that the Microsoft fear that somebody would send us a submarine patent was huge because it was still tied to the .NET code base. And so they were not about to take the risk. And so what we did in that project is to say, thank you for this fantastic patch, but we're not accepting patches yet. And it only took us doing that twice in 2 days in a row, and nobody ever gave us another patch. But those 2 patches were the first 2 patches through the door. That's how much gold you can get on day 1. Finally, let's talk about my favorite, business troubles. How many people here run their own businesses? Okay, I'm hoping you like what I have to say. It's a set of business problems. Companies make these mistakes all the time, big and little. It doesn't matter what their experience base is. These are the mistakes that companies make around open source. They confuse the projects with the products. They somehow think that the community is part of the pipeline. And they think there's actually an open source business model. And there isn't. One of the things, our industry loves car metaphors. I don't know why. Maybe that's an American thing. Open source is steel. Car parts are your distros. The car on the end, though, is a product. Yes, I know there's kit cars out there. But that very nice shiny red Mustang is a product. You give Ford Motor Company money for it. And it comes with expectations. I'm actually more into organics. That actually didn't come out right. To me, open source projects are trees. And distros are lumber. The product is the house. But understand there's a whole lot of work that goes into turning the trees into lumber and the lumber into a house. And in that value exchange, yes, you could go build your own house, but a lot of people want to buy the built house. They want to buy the built car. And that's not a terrible thing. This just goes back to the way people behave. But this is the dividing line that if you're running a business and you engages in an open source project in any way, whether it's your own project, like a Docker, or whether it's a different project that you depend on, like a Red Hat, it's understanding where the value is and understanding what problem you're solving for the customer and who your community is as a different group of people to talk to. So these are, it's Linux the project versus Fedora the distro versus Realm. It's OpenStack. OpenStack is a project. Helium was a product. It was a horrible product. Now let me explain that. I went into HP. I was hired for kind of 4 things, and it was in the cloud business unit. And so the way I look at this is like, oh, okay, so we're participating in this huge project over here. Great, I get it. And Helium's the product. Well, I know what that means. But apparently the executive didn't. So they've been convinced to do all of their engineering dollar spend upstream in the project. This is a big company. It knows how to make system level products. I rated people out of Fort Collins, HP, for my startup. I know how good they are at operating systems. And this is systems level stuff. But there's no engineering dollars left for final test and fit and finish and productization. So, we probably had a quarter of the number of engineers doing that work that we should have, because we put all of our investment dollars upstream in the project. And you gotta still turn the project into a product for customers. You gotta still go do that fit and finish work. The last one's kind of interesting. If you talk to people in the Kubernetes projects, oh no, they'll tell you it's one and the same. No, Kubernetes is the product. No, it's not. GKE is the product. That's the thing you give Google money for. And I work for Azure. In my world, you give us money for AKS. You don't give us money for Kubernetes. Now, if you talk to Google, they'll say, no, it's the same thing. You say, okay, so why do you say that? And they will tell you without blushing, 5 days after a major Kubernetes release, that code is running live in GKE. Okay, so what did you do in the 5 days? Oh, a little this and that. there was certain extra testing, there was certain documentation. Okay, so you turned it into a product that you sell for money. There's no shame in that. But at least be honest that the thing that all of us are collaborating on over here is a project. And it's a very short step to the product, but it's still a step. And that last testing is a big step. So it's these kinds of mistakes lots and lots of people make them. People that should know better make them. Like they aren't lying to you when they tell you, no, Kubernetes is the product. They aren't lying. In their heads, they believe this. At Microsoft, I think the only reason they were a little more aware of that in the Azure team is it was taking them 2 weeks to do that extra set of steps. and because they came out of a world of boxed software, they understood that there are steps that need to be done. One of the other reasons you have to pay attention to this is you'll hear about conversion rate in companies that don't know what they're talking about. And this is a big one in Silicon Valley right now. Like the investors are all over this. Oh, we're going to convert community members into customers. I suspect where this came from, the 1 out of 1,000 is something that Martin Mikos said back in about 2003, 2005 timeframe. And what he said was, for every 1,000 users out there, we have a customer. Those were the words that came out of his mouth. He didn't say, we convert a customer out of every 1,000 users. For the number of users they could track out there and the number of customers he had, that was the rough ratio. People thought it was a conversion rate because this was that period of time when people were desperately trying to invent business models on open source. Around the time that JBoss was acquired by Red Hat, so I think we're talking 2004, 2005 time, 2005 maybe. JBoss, being the savvy business it was because we're being acquired by Red Hat, the cool guys, said, oh no, we convert, they use the conversion rate. We have a 3% conversion rate. Red Hat, acquiring them, not to be outdone, said, oh, we convert 1 out of 10. So now all of a sudden conversion ratios are a thing. Now for all the business people in here, what business ratio have you ever encountered, ever, that changes by orders of magnitude within a group of companies in an industry? It's just not a thing. There is no way that one company is 2 orders of magnitude better or 3 orders of magnitude better than another company in the software business. It just doesn't happen that way. So that's indicative of the problem. The solution is what you need to do is you need to be really sensitive to having a customer conversation with your customers and a community conversation with your community members. Getting ahead of myself. And what this is really about is money versus time observation. And this was actually another Martin Mikos saying back in that time period. Yeah, customers have money, but they have no time. In your community, they don't have any money. Now this is a really important thing. If you imagine for a moment, and it doesn't matter whether you run your product management as more of a thing in engineering, so it's engineering led, and you've got some marketing folks there to help you with the messaging. Or if your product management is more of a marketing thing, where you've got a bunch of engineers that used to be engineers that become marketing folks now. They're very good with people and they've learned the marketing side of the business. It doesn't matter which way you do this, you have to understand the conversations. That's the important thing here. A company called Hyperic got really good at their opening when you hit their homepage. They basically had all but a flashing font saying, oh, you're in the community, please go this way. Oh, you're a customer, please come this way. Even though they also still had a free set of binaries for customers as a try before you buy. Again, you get into this confusion. Oh, it's free software. No, this is free as money. Well, what about the free as beer stuff? And they were just very clear in making sure they guided customers in one direction, community members in the other. Because you have to set the expectations in each of those discussions really clearly. And not only that, you're going to measure those discussions. There's a growing set of metrics in how do you manage a community. But they're different from the kind of KPIs that you measure the sales and marketing team. So it really is like, you still get amazing stuff out of your community. They're going to solve their problems with the software in the project. They're going to want help with that. But they're going to become amazing advocates for you. Ultimately, they make your technology sticky. If you think about NGINX, even though NGINX, NGINX Plus, I believe, is the product, even though it does extra things, the fact that there's a whole lot of people using NGINX, the software, because they make it really easy to load the free binaries and all the rest of it, at that point, they're not using any of your competitors' stuff. They're gaining expertise on your stuff. On the customer side of the house, they just want to solve a problem and they want to solve it now. Open source has become, in the 90s, lots of customers learned that standards meant I might have choices. It wasn't a guarantee, but it gave them a certain comfort level. At this point, customers think open source gives them choices. If the company that I'm buying something from blows up, well, at least there's going to be people in that community that could probably support it. If the company that I'm buying from suddenly decides to triple the prices, well, there's people in that community that could probably take on the job. So it's not a guarantee, but at least it gives you confidence as a customer. Customers will show up in your community because they're road testing things. Customers will show up in your community because they actually want to contribute and they're doing certain things on the side. So the mainstream production stuff, they may be sitting there making sure it's all running well, but on the community side, they may be doing other things. It's everybody happily wrote a big check to Red Hat for RHEL in production while they were using CentOS for all of their developer workstations and all their test machines. Those kinds of things. And Red Hat is a joy of an example. I have to tell the story of Red Hat and 3 CEOs in 3 different markets, making 3 different sets of decisions, and I never talk about open source. This upsets the Red Hat engineers no end. They hate when I tell this story, because they feel less special. But Red Hat is an amazingly successful software company, because at the end of the day, they focus on their customers. They're also a company that's really good at the engineering economics of open source. When I'm in a foul mood, I'll say they've never met an open source project. They're not willing to buy, build for themselves, or bully into submission in the names of building a better meritocracy. But the reality is they focus on ensuring their supply chain is secure so they can solve their customer problems. That's what Red Hat does, and they do it better than any other company out there. So when people talk about, oh, there'll never be another Red Hat, sure there will. There's all kinds of software companies. You guys represent a whole set of software companies, many of whom will be successful. Because you'll focus on your customers and you'll run a really good software company. And if you care about open source, you'll figure out that line between projects and products, and you'll figure out how to talk to your community versus talking to your customers, and you'll go do great things. Before I wrap up, I just want to leave you with a quote. This is the hardest thing about running a company, is knowing what problem you're solving for your customer. Theodore Levitt was an economist at Harvard that started bludgeoning his students with this line back in the early 90s. And I think because we're technologists, we all get wrapped up in the idea that it's about the software. And when you're actually running a company, it's actually about the problem you're solving for your customer. That's the thing you really have to keep in mind. It's not a debate about how the software is licensed. It's not a debate about how cool the software is. It's did you solve the customer's problem? So, wrapping it all up. You're a company using open source. That's the two buckets of questions you need to care about. How do we solve problems for our customers? How do we make them successful? And on the community side, if you care about open software, how do you make your community healthier? Docker is actually a company that's been doing a pretty good job of figuring this out as they continue to grow and scale. All the work that they just went through with tearing Docker into Docker and Moby last year, they were basically rerunning the playbook that Red Hat did 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when they tore Red Hat Linux into RHEL and Fedora. And everybody was just as confused 12 years ago as people were confused about Moby. If you're a community leader, regardless of where you do this, don't get confused by your community. Ask not what your community can be doing for you. Figure out how to build those on-ramps so you can be getting your community to scale with you. Learn on the personal burnout side, learn to say, great idea. Please send me a pull request. Because otherwise, you will burn out. And lastly, if you work in the industry around this stuff, it's recognize that some of these problems are software problems. It's inherent in the dynamic nature of software. It's inherent in the complexity with the software engineering process that needs to be adhered to build great products or to build great communities. And if you keep that in mind, you won't get lost in the horrible rat hole discussions about things that are important but don't matter in a debate about open source. And that's all I have.
I have no idea how long I'm here, or if I'm between you and drinks, how many questions you want me to answer. Please.
Hi, I have two questions. The first is, when you say vendors, what do you mean? I'm sorry, I just didn't.
A software vendor, somebody who sells software. So
Distributors.
distributor works as well. Though distributor means something very different to me. So when we had Software Systems, the company doing the Unix front end on NT, we were the vendor. But I had a distributor in Israel. The last time I was in Tel Aviv was 20 years ago. And I had an Israeli distributor. So to me, they were merely somebody who was selling the software on our behalf. So the vendor is the person who puts it in the box. The vendor is the person you're going to give money to, ultimately, and the person you're going to yell at when it doesn't work.
Okay, and the second question is that, could you say a few more words about Linus' rule?
So Linus's rule basically said that all bugs are shallow, given sufficient eyeballs. What Eric Raymond meant by that is, because we have so many people in the community looking at this software, not just the company that built the software, that we'll be able to find bugs so much more quickly. That's the way people interpret it. But what I actually think it means is it's more speaking to software review. Because if you have a healthy culture of reviewing software before it gets built, before it's checked into the final build, then those reviewers are going to find the bugs faster. And that's actually, there was two different studies done, 98, 99 time frame. One came out of Ericsson in Sweden, and the other one came out of CTO for all of Azure. Gives a talk. He's given it publicly a number of times now, and he talks about building out new data centers. I still think of Microsoft, when I'm not paying attention, as the company that used to put software in a box 20 years ago. When you see Mark talk about that level, oh my God, there's more of them than I thought. When Mark talks about the build out at that level of civil engineering, just phenomenal. So I've watched the company come through that. From an open source perspective, there's been a whole lot of experimentation. It's funny, some of the executives have given a presentation now with the big arrow, moving up in the right direction, kind of thing of the growth of open source experience at Microsoft. And they start with Wix. And that was the project that I helped the developer who built Wix crack out of the way. And that would have been 2003 or 2004. And the thing to understand was, again, this was still the height of the fear. And it was a Microsoft engineer publishing a project on SourceForge, because that's where you did it back then, using an IBM license on it, and then running that project in the public. And that was shocking for the public, but it was also shocking for Microsoft. But at this point, Andres Helm, he's the guy that did C#, he did Turbo Pascal, I think was his first language. He did TypeScript, but he started TypeScript in public on GitHub and was taking pull requests almost immediately. He'll stand up in an audience and sing the praises of how much better TypeScript as a language on top of JavaScript is because of all of the external contributions, the stuff he never could have imagined. That came in from JavaScript users that were very serious, that came in from academia. So the company is continuing to learn both in how to contribute in the Linux kernel, into how to start its own projects, so things like VS Code and TypeScript and .NET Core, PowerShell. I mean, it's a growing number of projects. So to me, is it like Microsoft love it now? No, there's still a lot of confusion. But certainly in the Azure world, that confusion is not the old confusion and fear. It's much more of a confusion, and occasionally we get something wrong. But it's nothing but a growing wave of support. I was asked not that long ago if we changed CEO again, went back to a Ballmer-like person, would it change? And I don't think it would. I think the culture in Microsoft has come past that point where there are so many examples now, things like TypeScript, that are just so much better because of what the contribution flow is coming. Sort of answer?
Thanks, Steve. Thanks, everyone, for coming out.
I'm still
Getting
running.
up. Thanks, everyone, for coming out. And yeah, have a great evening. If people want to organize up and find a place to go and continue the conversation there. Yeah.